She had known since September. She continued to make dinner, fold his shirts, and laugh at his jokes at dinner parties. Somewhere in those months, married to a man who assumed she wasn't paying attention, she had learned that the most powerful position she could hold was the one he didn't know she occupied. Mara Solis was 31 and 7 months pregnant. She had known for 3 months. The knowing had not arrived in a single moment. It had arrived the way most true things arrived in increments, each small enough to dismiss in isolation, each impossible to dismiss in aggregate. She was a graphic designer. She spent her days looking at negative space, at the relationship between elements, at the way a composition told its truth through what it included and what it left out. She had been trained to see structure. She had been trained to see when something was wrong with the structure. The wrongness in Gail Whitmore's behavior had revealed itself the same way a misaligned grid revealed itself first, as a vague discomfort, a sense that something was not sitting right. And then, once she had identified what to look for, as something she could not unsee. The phone had been the first signal, not because she had seen anything on it. She had never searched his phone. She believed that that kind of invasiveness said more about the searcher than about whatever might be found. The phone had been a signal because of the way he held it. Gail had always kept his phone on the coffee table, face up. The casual indifference of someone with nothing to hide and no expectation of hiding anything. That had changed in August. In August, the phone moved to his pocket. It moved to his side of the nightstand, which had previously been a book and his reading glasses. It moved to a position between his body and whatever wall or surface was nearest. The specific geometry of someone who had reorganized their physical environment to create distance between a device and the people who might see it. She had noticed this the second time it happened. She had filed it. She had waited. The overtime had been the second signal. Gail was a corporate attorney. He worked long hours. This had always been true. But the hours had increased in August in a way that did not fit the surge that came with a big case. She knew that pattern. She'd lived through it twice in their 4 years of marriage, the heavy exhaustion of someone worn down by work, not the restless drain of effort directed elsewhere. He came home tired in a different way. He came home with the slight overperformance of someone who has been practicing a version of themselves. She had noticed this the 3rd week. She had filed it. She had waited. The thing with the appearance was the 3rd signal, and it was the one that removed the last possibility of coincidence. Gail had never been careless about how he looked. He wore good suits and kept them well maintained. His relationship with his barber had lasted longer than their marriage. In late August, he began tending his appearance differently, with a careful, specific attention. It was the sort of attention someone gives when performing for an audience, not when simply keeping a standard. She came home one Friday evening and found him in the bathroom, studying his reflection with the same exacting eye she used in design, checking whether the image he presented matched the one he'd chosen. He had not heard her come in. She went to the kitchen and put the kettle on. There was nothing to say yet, and speaking before she was certain would have lost the advantage of knowing. She confirmed it in the 2nd week of September, not by looking at his phone. She was somewhere he didn't expect, at a time she wasn't supposed to be, and she saw exactly what she'd been bracing for. She saw him on the street, outside a restaurant she didn't know he knew about, with a woman whose name she would later learn was Petra. And the way they stood together had the specific quality of two people who have graduated past the stage of performance into the ease of established territory. She saw it from across the street, through the window of a taxi that was stopped at a red light, and the light changed before she could decide what to do. And the taxi moved, and she sat in the moving taxi with her hands in her lap and her heart doing something that she would not let herself call what it was. She got home before him. She sat in the kitchen with a glass of water and she thought, not about what she had seen. The seeing was done. The processing of it would take the time it took. And the time was going to be considerable, but about what she wanted to do with what she knew. She thought about this with the same methodical approach she brought to a new design brief. First, establish the objective. Second, identify the constraints. Third, determine the resources available. Fourth, build the strategy. The objective was this: to leave with her dignity, her finance, and her child's future intact. Not to punish him. Punishment was not her objective, and she recognized it clearly enough to rule it out. Because punishment required ongoing engagement with the person you were punishing, and ongoing engagement with Gail Whitmore was not something she wanted. The objective was simply to exit, cleanly and completely, on her own terms. The constraints were the pregnancy and the money. She was 4 months pregnant, and she had 7 weeks until viable maternity leave from the freelance contracts that were her primary income. She needed those weeks of income. She also needed to understand her legal position before she made any move that could be used against her, which meant she needed to speak to a lawyer, not anyone Gail knew, which meant not anyone who moved in the professional orbit of a corporate attorney in Chicago, which narrowed the field but did not eliminate it. The shared finances were more complicated. They had a joint account that was used for household expenses and 2 individual accounts that had been theoretically separate for the duration of the marriage. Theoretically. In practice, the income flows had been more intermingled than was wise for someone who needed to be able to establish individual financial standing quickly. She began making a list of what she would need to untangle, and how. Her resources were her professional income, which was reliable and transferable, and her individual savings, which were modest but real. She also had her sister Rosa in Evanston, the person Mara called when she needed competence rather than comfort, and Vivian Whitmore, Gail's mother, whom Mara trusted to hear the truth from her directly rather than through whatever version Gail might tell. Vivienne was not a resource in the strategic sense, but she was someone who mattered, and mattering was its own category. She called a lawyer in the 3rd week of September. She had found the name through a search she did on her laptop in the university library 3 blocks from their apartment. She wasn't going to use the home network for a search Gail might have access to, and she wouldn't give him any information she didn't intend him to have. The lawyer's name was Adira Mehta, and she ran a West Loop practice that specialized in family law, with online reviews calling her precise, practical, and unsentimental. These were exactly the qualities Mara needed. The meeting with Adira Mehta lasted 90 minutes. Mara came prepared. She had organized her financial documents, made a list of assets and liabilities, and written out the timeline she needed for her own reference. Adira listened without interrupting and asked questions that targeted issues Mara hadn't thought to raise. By the end of the meeting, she gave a clear, detailed picture of Mara's legal position and what she would need to do to protect it. Mara took notes. She asked one clarifying question about the timing of filing. She paid the consultation fee from her individual account. She left. On the train home, she made a list of everything she needed to do before she was ready to move. She looked at the list for a long time. Then she folded it once and put it in her bag, tucked beneath her phone and wallet so it wouldn't be found unless someone was looking for it. She thought 3 months. I need 3 months. And then she thought I can do 3 months. She could do 3 months. This was difficult and painful and something she had not chosen, and that was going to cost her considerably. But it was not impossible. She always did the work in front of her, and she never expected it to be fair, comfortable, or easy. She was going to do this work. She was going to do it correctly. And when it was done, she was going to be on the other side of it, with everything she needed to start whatever came next. What came next was going to include a daughter. She had not told Gail it was a girl yet, The ultrasound at 17 weeks had confirmed it. She sat with the information for 3 days, turning it over the way she turned over things that mattered before deciding what to do with them. On the 4th day, she had decided she was not going to tell him yet. Not because she wanted to withhold it, and she wasn't interested in petty withholding, which would have been beneath what this period needed to be, but because she wanted to sit with the information a little longer on her own, because it was hers for a moment, before it was anyone else's, because she wanted to know the shape of it, the weight of it, before she introduced it into the household air where everything had to be shared and managed and navigated. She had started thinking of the baby as her daughter the day of the ultrasound, and the pronoun shift surprised her with a specificity she hadn't expected. She thought about her daughter the way she thought about the designs that mattered most to her, with patience and precision and a willingness to sit with the incomplete version until it showed her what it was becoming. Her daughter was becoming something. She was going to be there for the becoming. That was the most important thing, and it remained the most important thing through everything that followed. In the 3rd week of September, she moved $1,000 from the joint account to her individual account. Not a large amount, not enough to be noticed against the normal fluctuation of household expenses, but enough to begin establishing a pattern. She would move money in increments small enough to be individually explainable and collectively significant. She had done the math. By December, she would have enough in her individual account to cover first, last, and security on a modest apartment, plus 3 months of living expenses at a level she could sustain while maintaining her freelance income during the end of the pregnancy. She had run the numbers 4 times from 4 different angles before she trusted them enough to act on them. The numbers worked. The plan worked. She just needed the time. In October, she called a property manager about a 1-bedroom apartment in Wicker Park. Not the neighborhood she would have chosen for purely aesthetic reasons. She would have chosen somewhere quieter, with more green space, but the apartment had good light, a functional kitchen, and a building that accepted month-to-month leases after the first 6 months, which mattered for someone who needed flexibility while navigating a divorce and a new baby simultaneously. She put down a deposit. The apartment would be available from December 26th. She did not pack anything visible. She had 3 months, and packing visibly would have collapsed the 3 months into an immediate confrontation for which she was not yet fully prepared. Instead, she identified which of her possessions mattered and began moving them out of the apartment in the natural course of daily life. She brought things to Rosa's apartment in Evanston, left items at the design studio, where she sometimes worked, and consolidated what remained in storage. By November, the things that were most hers had already left the apartment. What remained were the things they had chosen together, which were not hers in the way that the things she had chosen alone were hers, and which she was not going to fight for. The apartment in the months of October, November, and December looked exactly like it had always looked, because she had always been the one who made it look the way it looked. This gave her, in a particular and practical way, complete control over the appearance of things. She made the apartment look like itself. She continued to cook dinner. She continued to sit across from Gael at the table and talk about their respective days and the news, and the small domestic logistics of 2 people sharing a life. And not once in 3 months did he appear to suspect that the person across the table from him was watching him with the eyes of someone who knew, who had always known, and who had decided. She wrote the letter to Vivienne in November, not the email she would send on Christmas night that came later. Shorter, more urgent. The letter was longer, more complete, written over the course of 3 evenings in the studio when she was nominally working late on a project. She wrote it because Vivienne deserved to understand what had happened and why Mara had not told her sooner, and because Mara was not going to leave this marriage without making sure the one person in the Whitmore family she genuinely respected had the truth from her own mouth rather than from the reconstruction of someone who would not give it honestly. By the first week of December, the only thing left in the apartment that was hers in the specific way she needed things to be hers was a single box under the bed on her side. That was the side Gail never came to. Because they had established in the first year of marriage the quiet, territorial division of a couple who had stopped sleeping in each other's space without acknowledging that they had stopped. The box held what she'd need for the first week in the new apartment: work materials, personal documents, and the small daily things he had never learned to notice. She had placed a coffee mug on top of the box, in the spot where something felt like it had always been. The mug had been there since October. He did not notice it in November or December either. She watched him not notice it. She thought, this is who he has been for 3 years. Not a person who noticed the coffee mug. Not a person who asked what the box under the bed was for. Not a person who looked at the person he lived with and saw what she was carrying. She thought, I did love him. She thought that wasn't enough, and that it hadn't been for a long time. She decided she would stop pretending otherwise at 7:45 on the evening of December 25th. She had not chosen the date. The date had been chosen by whatever instinct governs such things, by the knowledge that Christmas was the last place he would expect her to have organized herself completely. The unexpectedness of it felt less like cruelty than like accuracy. This was the truth of where they had arrived. Christmas was the moment it became visible. She turned off the bedroom light on the night of December 24th. She thought about September. She thought about the taxi stopping at the red light. She thought about her daughter's due date. February 14th, a day she'd always found absurdly apt, and now found even more so. She thought about the apartment in Wicker Park, with its good light and its month-to-month lease. She thought about Vivienne, and about Rosa, and about Adira Mehta's clear, practical voice outlining her options without sentiment. She fell asleep quickly. She had been sleeping well for months. The decision had been made in September. Everything since had been execution, and execution was something she was good at. Being good at what she was doing, she had found, was the most reliable route to sleep. Tomorrow was Christmas. She was ready. In October, she had a conversation with Gail about the nursery. He had been enthusiastic, or had performed enthusiasm, which she had decided were close enough to the same thing for the purposes of navigating a domestic space, and they had spent a Saturday morning looking at paint colors, and had ordered a crib, and had talked about where to put the changing table. She had engaged with all of this. The nursery was real. The baby was real. The fact that she was going to be the one living with both of those things in a different apartment was also real. But it was a reality that belonged to the future, and the future was her business, and she was managing it. The crib arrived in November. She assembled it alone on a Tuesday afternoon while Gail was at work, following the instructions with the methodical patience she brought to all assembly projects. And when it was done, she stood in the half-finished nursery and looked at it. The crib was pale, wood, and simple, and exactly what she had chosen. She put her hands on the railing. She thought, this is going to come with me. She had checked the disassembly instructions before she ordered it. The crib would come apart and reassemble without damage. She had planned for this, because she planned for everything. And the planning was the thing that had kept her sane in 3 months of doing an extraordinarily difficult thing in complete silence. Rosa had called in mid-October, which was a week after Mara had told her everything. Rosa was 2 years younger and lived in Evanston and taught elementary school, and was the person in Mara's life most capable of absorbing difficult information and responding to it practically, rather than emotionally, which was what Mara needed. Rosa had said, after Mara finished, "What do you need from me? Not what happened, or how are you feeling, or are you sure? What do you need?" That was Rosa. Mara had told her storage space. For now, Rosa had said, "You have it." They had not talked about it again in detail, because they did not need to. The conversation had been had. The offer was standing, and Rosa would be there when the time came. Gail's behavior in the October and November months was something Mara observed with the attention of a researcher who had decided to document rather than respond. He continued to see Petra. She was certain of this without needing verification. The signs being consistent, and his explanations for his time consistent, in the way that rehearsed explanations were consistent, which was differently from the way true explanations were consistent. He was not, she thought, particularly skilled at deception. He was skilled at the assumption that he was not being observed, which had served him for a while, and which she had now fully exploited. The irony of this, that the very quality that had made him comfortable enough to deceive her was the quality that allowed her to prepare so thoroughly, was not lost on her. She had thought about it several times, usually late at night, when she was in the particular half-awake state in which true things arrived clearly. She had thought he never looked. That is the whole story. He never learned to look. She had loved him once. This was true, and she kept it true, because revising history was not something she was willing to do, even when history had become something she was leaving behind. She had loved him in the way that she loved things she built, with attention and investment, and the ongoing maintenance that good things required. She had believed, in the first 2 years of the marriage, that he was doing the same thing. She had been wrong about this, and the wrongness was not the catastrophic wrongness of someone who had been deceived from the beginning. It was the subtler wrongness of someone who had watched a good thing become a less good thing, and had not known how to name what was happening fast enough to stop it. She did not blame herself for this. She had named it now. She was acting on the naming. That was what she had. In the second week of December, she bought a string of lights for the window of the Wicker Park apartment. She did not bring them to the current apartment. They were in a bag in the storage unit that was, by now, a fairly complete picture of the life she was going to be living. But she had bought them because she knew she was going to want them. Because light in a new space was the first thing she always did. Because she was already living in the new space in her head, in the way that she lived in a design before it was finished, feeling its proportions and its light sources and the way she would move through it. The lights were small and warm, and not Christmassy in the commercial sense, but in the way of things that were genuinely welcoming. And she thought, I am going to hang those on the window of the new apartment on December 26th, and they are going to be the first thing I put in that space. And they will be mine. On December 20th, she saw her obstetrician, who said the baby's position looked fine. Her blood pressure was normal, and that she should keep avoiding stress. She had sat with this instruction for a moment. She had said, I'm working on it. The obstetrician laughed. It was the right response both outwardly and inwardly. The advice to avoid stress was at once the most sensible and the most useless she'd ever been given. She had been managing it for 3 months by converting it into action. The action was almost complete. In 5 days, she would no longer need to manage it. She drove home from the appointment and parked on their street. She sat in the car for a few minutes before going in. She looked at the building, the red brick, the familiar windows, the lobby that she had walked through more times than she could count. She thought, this is a place I lived. She thought, I am going to miss the lobby light in the morning. She thought, I am not going to miss enough of it to make this worth reconsidering. She got out of the car. She went inside. She made dinner. They ate it. 4 more days. 4 more days. And then she was done. And she was ready to be done. Mara had not anticipated the specific texture of living a double life. As the weeks passed, she realized that even knowing it in advance would not have prepared her. It was not what she had imagined, not the constant strain of performance, not the exhausting maintenance of a false face. It was, instead, a kind of doubling. She was genuinely present in the conversations she had with Gail about the nursery and the holidays, and the mutual acquaintances whose lives continued around them. And she was simultaneously somewhere else entirely, in a parallel track of practical action that occupied the same hours and the same physical space, but ran on a completely different level of reality. She had not known she was capable of this. She found that she was. The first thing she discovered was that the doubling was, in a strange way, clarifying. She had spent years in the marriage in a low-level confusion about what she was feeling and what she was supposed to feel. She couldn't tell whether that gap pointed to something wrong with her or something wrong with the marriage. The confusion cleared in September, when she stopped needing to reconcile the two realities into one coherent emotional narrative, and instead accepted them as separate things that could coexist. This was a relief. She had not expected relief, but she recognized it when it arrived. The second thing she discovered was that the 3 months showed her things about Gael she had not seen clearly before. Not because he changed. He did not change. Or changed so gradually that the change was imperceptible within the small increments of daily life, but because she was watching from a different position. She was watching from the position of someone who already knew the ending. From that position, certain things became visible that had been obscured by her participation in the story as a main character rather than as an observer. The way he talked about his work. Too much detail. Not quite the right kind of detail. The specific density of someone constructing a narrative rather than reporting one. The way he moved through the apartment, efficiently, economically, with the quality of someone passing through a space rather than living in it. The way he looked at his phone briefly, with the suppressed urgency of someone who was waiting for something and was disciplining themselves not to check too frequently. She observed all of this with the clinical attention of someone conducting a study, which was, she supposed, what she was. She had not cried between September and December. Not once. She had thought, in the first week of September, that this was temporary, that the practical tasks would give way at some point to the emotional ones, and that she would find herself on the bathroom floor or in the shower with the kind of grief that didn't wait for a convenient time. This had not happened. What had happened instead was a kind of ongoing recalibration at each day she woke up and took stock of what she was feeling, which was usually some combination of sadness and determination and a sharp, clear-eyed sense of forward motion. And she filed the sadness in its appropriate place and deployed the determination for the tasks that were in front of her. She thought about this sometimes, the absence of the crying, and she wondered if it meant she had not loved him enough, or if it meant she had grieved the marriage before the marriage was over, the way she had sometimes grieved things before they ended a project she knew was being cancelled, a friendship she could feel becoming more formal. She had learned to grieve in advance. A kind of pre-adaptation, and perhaps she had been doing it with the marriage for longer than she had consciously known. Perhaps the grief had been happening at a level below her awareness since the first year when she had felt something shift and had told herself it was just the adjustment of living with someone, the wearing away of newness into something more durable. Perhaps it had been something else, and she had not wanted to know that yet. She did not blame herself for this, either. She had known what she needed to know, when she needed to know it. That was the most she could ask of herself. The meetings with Adira Mehta had been, altogether, 3. The first was the initial consultation. The second, in October, was about the specifics of the filing, what documentation she would need, what the timeline would look like, what her rights were with respect to the pregnancy and the child's welfare. The third, in late November, was about reviewing the draft of the divorce petition and the accompanying agreement, which Adira had prepared on the basis of their earlier discussions, and which Mara had reviewed with the thoroughness she brought to any document she was going to sign. She had asked 4 questions about the custody language. Adira had answered all 4. The document was sound. Mara had signed the copies she would take with her. She had thought, in the first meeting with Adira, that she would feel something significant about the signing. She had not. The document was a tool, neutral in its purpose. Her relationship with tools had always been professional rather than emotional. What she had felt, instead, was something she did not have a precise word for, a kind of solid finality. The way a design felt when you made the last decision and the composition locked into place, and you knew you were done. Not happy, not sad, simply done with the uncertainty and in possession of the clarity that came after uncertainty, which was always worth the time it took to reach it. Rosa came to the Evanston apartment in November to help Mara move a carload of things into the storage unit. They loaded the car in the morning. Rosa's car was larger and drove to the facility in silence, which was not an uncomfortable silence, but the silence of two people who understood each other well enough not to fill space with words that weren't necessary. At the facility, they carried boxes in without speaking much. When they were done, Rosa leaned against the car and looked at Mara. "You're all right," she said. It was not a question. "I'm all right," Mara said. "The baby is all right. The baby is very all right. She's been kicking since Tuesday in a way that suggests she has opinions." Rosa looked at her for a moment. "She. You're going with she." "She. It was confirmed at 17 weeks, and I've been sitting with it for 2 months. And you didn't tell me." "I'm telling you now." Rosa was quiet for another moment. Then she pulled Mara into a brief, firm hug, the kind Rosa gave, which was always exactly as long as it needed to be, and never longer, and said, "Okay, let's get breakfast." They got breakfast. Mara ate an unreasonable amount of eggs. It was one of those second trimester things she found both inconvenient and oddly compelling. Rosa told a story about a student who had made her a drawing of a dinosaur with remarkably detailed teeth. Mara laughed the way she always did at Rosa's classroom stories. Genuinely and without effort. She thought, this is still here. This is still mine. He hasn't taken this. She thought about that several times in the weeks that followed. The things he hadn't taken. The relationship with Rosa. The work she did, which was hers in the way that work done from conviction was always yours, regardless of the circumstances around it. The specific pleasure she took in the design process, which was available to her regardless of where she was living or who she was living with. The baby, who was hers in a way that was absolute and not contingent on anyone else's behavior or choices. She made a practice, in the months of October and November, of noticing these things, of naming them to herself at the end of each day, the way she had once been told, to name 3 things you were grateful for as a mindfulness exercise, and had always found too banal to actually do. This was different, because she was not naming things to cultivate gratitude in the abstract. She was naming them to maintain an accurate picture of her resources. She was taking inventory. She was a person who took inventory. The inventory looked good. The pregnancy had been, in the 3 months since September, the thing she had thought least about, strategically, and most about in every other way. She had thought about her daughter. She called her that now. The daughter. Sometimes just her. She gave that child the sustained, private attention the months of outward performance had left available for inner life. She had thought about what kind of person her daughter would become. She had thought about what kind of person she wanted her daughter to see her mother as. She had thought about what the first years of the daughter's life were going to look like in practical terms. She had thought about these things not anxiously, but with the kind of anticipatory planning that was her natural mode of relating to the future. She made pictures of it, detailed and honest, and she assessed them for structural soundness, and she made adjustments where the structure was weak. The picture she had made of the first year looked like this. The Wicker Park apartment would be small but sufficient. The freelance income she had been building deliberately for 3 years was now reliable enough to sustain her through the end of the pregnancy and the early months with appropriate adjustments to her project load. Rosa's proximity was both geographic and practical. She would help in the ways asked for, and would not help in the ways that weren't asked for. Vivienne was someone she intended to keep in her life, because Vivienne was worth keeping regardless of what had happened with Gail. Adira would navigate the legal process. The daughter herself was already a series of movements Mara had learned to interpret the way she had learned to interpret other kinds of communication. A specific and developing language she was paying attention to. On the 1st of December, Mara took the afternoon off from work and went to the Wicker Park apartment to meet the property manager and collect the keys. The apartment was on the 3rd floor, a 1-bedroom with a living room that faced south and got good winter light, and a kitchen that had been renovated at some point in the recent past, and that was functional without being impressive. The bathroom was adequate. The bedroom was large enough for the crib. The living room was large enough for her desk, and the second-hand sofa she had arranged to have delivered on the 27th. She walked through the rooms twice. Once for the practical assessment, and once for the feeling of it. She thought, this is where we're going to live for a while. It's going to be fine. She meant it. Not as reassurance or performance, but as an honest assessment. This was a good apartment, in a workable location, with the light she needed, and the space that was sufficient, and the month-to-month flexibility that was required. It was exactly what she had planned for, and it was enough. She hung the keys on her key ring when she got home that evening, next to the other keys. When Gael asked about the new key, he noticed it. The first thing he had noticed in months, which she thought with a specific irony she did not let show on her face. She said it was the studio key, and that the building manager had replaced all the locks. He accepted this without further question. She had expected that. She had prepared a more detailed explanation if needed. But it had not been needed, because Gael did not press questions about things he had decided were not his business. And her work life was a category he had long since decided was not his business. This was, she thought, simultaneously, one of the most irritating and one of the most convenient features of their marriage. December moved through its days with the particular quality of Decembers in Chicago, cold and committed. The kind of cold that was not incidental but intentional, that meant to be felt. She bought a wreath for the door, which she had done. Every December they had lived in this apartment, and she hung it, and she thought, last one. She baked the cookies she baked every year, which were her grandmother's recipe, and which took most of a Saturday, and which she was going to continue to make regardless of where she was living. Because the cookies were hers, and not a feature of this marriage. She wrapped gifts for Gael. She had bought them in November. Carefully. The kind of gifts that communicated consideration without intimacy, and she put them under the tree they had bought together the first week of December. And she stood back and looked at the tree and thought, I am very good at this. I am very good at making things look the way they should look. She had not known, 4 years ago, when she had learned this skill in the context of making this marriage look good, that it would someday be useful for the process of leaving it. On the night of December 21st, she did the last thing that remained. She moved the box from under the bed to the car. Gael was asleep. She did it in 3 trips, quiet enough not to wake him, quick enough that the whole thing was done in 12 minutes. The car was parked half a block away, which meant she was slightly out of range of any sound that might have carried. And the winter night was the particular quiet of winter nights at 2 in the morning, when the cold had sent everyone inside, and the city was doing its minimal version of itself. She loaded the box. She looked at the car for a moment, at the accumulated months, at the organized evidence of a life she had prepared with care, and she thought, tomorrow is the 22nd. 3 more days. She went back inside. She washed her hands in the kitchen sink. She went to bed. 3 more days, and the thing would be done. She had waited 3 months for it. She could wait 3 days. On Christmas Eve morning, she woke early, before Gael. She lay in bed in the particular pre-dawn quiet and took inventory one more time. The apartment in Wicker Park. Confirmed and keyed. The legal documents. Signed and waiting in the envelope on the table that she had placed there, in a moment she had timed precisely, because she was not going to arrive at the last day of this plan with the logistics incomplete. The money in her individual account. Sufficient. Rosa's phone number at the top of her contacts list. Ready to call. Vivienne's email address in her drafts. The note half composed. Everything was in order. The plan was complete. Tomorrow was Christmas. The day after Christmas was the beginning of what came after. She lay in the bed and listened to Gael's breathing. For the first and only time she wondered what she would say to him if she ever had the chance to say the thing that was most true. Not the legal language in the documents. Not the practical facts about finances and custody and the disposition of shared assets. The thing that was most true. She thought about it for a long time, and when she arrived at it, it was not accusatory, and it was not forgiving. It was simple. The way true things were simple. I needed you to see me, and you never learned how. She got up. She made coffee. She started the day. Christmas Eve had a specific quality that she had always found both beautiful and slightly melancholy, the anticipation of it, the sense of a day holding its breath before something arrived. She had loved this quality in childhood. She found it. Now, poignant in a different way. This was the last Christmas Eve in this apartment, the last morning of a particular version of her life. She was spending it the way she had spent all her mornings here making coffee, looking out the window at the street below, thinking about the day ahead. She had a list of things to do on Christmas Eve that she always did: wrap the last few gifts and confirm the arrival time for the meal they were having with a couple they knew. Gael's colleague Brandt and his wife Lydia had invited them for dinner. She had accepted the invitation in October, because declining would have required an explanation she wasn't ready to give. She'd also known the dinner would be over by 10. She'd be home the next morning for Christmas, and the day after that would be the day she left. She had planned around the dinner as she had planned around everything else as a variable in the schedule. Neutral. To be navigated. The dinner was fine. Brandt was a man she had never liked particularly and had always found professionally tolerable. Lydia was more interesting than the marriage to Brandt would have predicted. And the dinner had the particular pleasantness of a social occasion where the stakes were low enough to allow genuine enjoyment. She drank sparkling water and ate well. The food was good. Lydia was an excellent cook, and she listened to the conversation, participated in it, and laughed twice at things that were genuinely funny. At no point did she feel that she was performing. She was simply there, in the room, present in the way she had always been when she was genuinely attending. On the way home, in the car, Gael reached across the console and put his hand on hers. She let it rest there. She looked at his hand, familiar, large-knuckled. The hand she had known for 4 years. And she thought, I am not going to remember this the way I would have remembered it at a different point in our life. She thought, that is not his fault, and it is not mine. She thought some things cannot be recovered, and pretending otherwise serves no one. She moved her hand, not abruptly, to adjust the heat control on her side of the car. When they got home, she went to the bedroom while he locked up. She sat on the edge of the bed and kept thinking about the envelope on the table. Not this table. The other table. The one in Wicker Park she would be sitting at tomorrow evening. The documents inside it. And the fact that tomorrow it would be over. This part of it. At least, this is the last night. She slept. Christmas morning arrived with the specific light of a December morning in Chicago when there is no snow, which was more common than Christmases with snow, but was always slightly disappointing, a gray, honest light that made no promises and kept none. She got up before Gael, as she usually did on holidays. And she went to the kitchen and she made pancakes. This was their tradition, pancakes on Christmas morning. A tradition she had introduced in the second year of their marriage, brought from her own family's practice of elaborate breakfast on the mornings that mattered. She had never talked about why she did this, had simply done it. And Gael had incorporated it into his understanding of what Christmas morning looked like without asking about its origin. She made the batter from memory. This was a recipe she had cooked since she was 12, with her mother standing beside her in that old apartment, explaining the ratio of baking powder to flour and the importance of real, cold butter, and she cooked the pancakes with the care she gave to anything she did well. When they were done, she set them on the table, stood back, and looked at them. They were good. They were exactly what pancakes were supposed to be. She had made them for herself, not for him, not for the occasion, not for the tradition, for herself, because she wanted to have pancakes on Christmas morning and because she was still here, in this kitchen, and she was going to make them. She was going to eat them. She was going to have the Christmas morning she had always given herself. Regardless of what the rest of the day held, Gael came downstairs while she was setting the table. He looked at the pancakes and he smiled in the way he smiled at things that were reliably good warmly, without surprise, with the specific pleasure of someone whose expectations have been met. She had loved that smile once. She saw it now as what it was, a reflection of his experience of the world, which was that things would reliably be good because someone reliably made them good. And the someone was almost always her, and he had never been required to notice that. "Morning," he said. "Morning." She poured coffee and set it in front of him. She sat down across from him and she served herself and she ate. They talked. The conversation was not strained and was not false. It was the conversation of two people who had been having breakfast together for 4 years and who knew the rhythms of that conversation, the comfortable topics and the ones that were left for later in the day. He talked about the weather, which was grey, but without the cold front that had been predicted, and she talked about a project she was wrapping up. And he mentioned something funny that Brandt had said at the dinner the night before, and she said something back, and the morning moved through its normal shape. She ate 2.5 pancakes, and she thought, this is the last breakfast we will have in this apartment, and it is a good breakfast, and I made it well. After breakfast, gifts. She had never been someone who experienced gifts primarily as objects. She experienced them as communication, the specific vocabulary of what the giver thought about the person they were giving to. Gael's gifts to her this year were the gifts of a man who had done the right things in the right quantities. He had given a set of drawing materials she had mentioned wanting in October, a sweater in a color he knew she liked, and a book about the history of Swiss graphic design she had flagged in a conversation with a client and that he had remembered. They told her nothing she didn't already know, which was that he had been paying partial attention for most of their marriage, enough to collect data, not enough to understand what the data was about. She gave him the gifts she had chosen, which were similarly calibrated, useful, considered, warm, without being intimate. He received them with the easy gratitude of someone who expected generosity. He accepted them and moved on. She watched him open them, and she thought, I am watching a man open gifts from his wife who is going to leave him tonight. He has no idea. And there is nothing cruel about this, because cruelty would be for his benefit. And this is not about him. This is about me getting to the end of the day I have planned. They cleaned up together. The morning was quiet and grey. The apartment looked the way it always did on Christmas morning, warm and ordered, the result of her work. She stood at the kitchen sink and looked out the window at the street below. She thought about the Wicker Park apartment and the light that came through its south-facing living room windows in the afternoon. She thought, I am going there tomorrow. The day after that, she would hang the lights in the window. After that, she would sit in that light and do her work. and that would be the beginning of the new version. The afternoon was quiet. Gail read. She worked on a project, a logo revision for a client she had been working with for 2 years, a small adjustment that had been on her list for a week. The work was good, and she did it with the full attention it deserved, because she had never been able to do work at partial attention, and she was not going to start now. She finished the revision. She sent it. She closed the laptop. Outside. The afternoon was getting dark in the way December afternoons did early, the light retreating before it felt like it should. The city, adjusting to the dark, with the practical efficiency of a place that had been doing this for a long time. She watched the street from the window. She thought about nothing in particular. She was waiting, and she was not anxious about the waiting, because for 3 months she had been waiting and had learned how to hold it without letting it consume her. At 4:47, Gail's phone lit up on the coffee table. He picked it up. She did not look. She did not need to look. He had learned months ago to read the change in his attention rather than its cause, but she felt the change happen. The particular shift in the quality of his presence when he was receiving a message that belonged to the other life. He was quiet for a moment. Then he stood. "I have to go in," he said. "Client emergency. A filing that's due first thing tomorrow." She looked up from her book. She looked at him the way she had always looked at him when he said things like this, with the neutral attention of someone receiving information rather than assessing it. "On Christmas," she said. "I know. I'm sorry." He was already moving toward the bedroom to get changed. "It'll be a few hours. These things happen." "They do," she said. He went to the bedroom. She sat with her book. She heard him moving around the particular sounds of Gail, getting ready to go somewhere he considered important. The sounds she had been listening to for 4 years without knowing, until 3 months ago, what the specific cadence of this version of the sounds meant. She closed her book. She set it on the side table. She stood, and she walked to the kitchen doorway, because the kitchen doorway was the natural position for someone who happened to be in the kitchen when their husband came downstairs to leave for a Christmas evening meeting. He came downstairs in his coat. He had his keys. He looked at her across the living room with the expression of someone who was performing reassurance for someone he assumed needed reassurance. "I'll be back by 9, he said. "Don't wait up." She was standing in the doorway with her hand resting on the frame, and she looked at him, really looked at him. The full, specific attention she had been withholding for 3 months. The attention she had been saving for this exact moment, and she felt something resolve inside her, something that had been held in tension for so long that the release of it was almost physical. She smiled. It was not the smile she had practiced or planned. It arrived the way true things arrived, from somewhere below the surface of what she had prepared, from the place where the 3 months of clarity had accumulated into something that was not anger or pain, but its own kind of certainty. She smiled because she was, at this moment, exactly where she had meant to be, and he was exactly where she had known he would be. And the machinery of his deception was operating exactly as she had understood it would operate, and all of it was about to become someone else's problem. "Enjoy your night," she said. 3 words. She said them with the specific warmth of someone who meant them, and she did mean them, in the way that a door meant to be walked through meant being opened. He had chosen this. She was letting him have it. He hesitated for half a second. The smile had not been what he expected. She could see it, the slight recalibration, the brief search for what the smile meant, and then he decided it meant nothing, and he nodded, and he went to the door. The door closed. She heard his footsteps on the stairs. She heard the lobby door. She heard, from 5 floors above, the sound of his car starting in the garage below the building, and the sound of it moving, and then the sound of it gone. She stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment. She let the sound of the empty apartment settle around her. It was 7:45 in the evening. On Christmas Day, and she was 7 months pregnant, and her husband had just left to see his girlfriend, and she was standing in the kitchen doorway with her hand on the frame, and she felt, for the first time in 3 months, the full weight of what she had been carrying. She walked to the kitchen table and she sat down and she put her hands flat on the surface and she let herself feel it. It was not the grief she had expected in September when she had imagined this moment. It was not anger. It was something more complex and more specific, a sadness for the version of herself who had loved this marriage and had meant to stay in it. The version who had made pancakes and bought Christmas wreath and believed, for the better part of 4 years, that the man across the table was the kind of man who would eventually learn to see what he had. That version of herself had been real, and she had been wrong about something real, and that was worth grieving. She let herself grieve it. She cried for 20 minutes. It was not the loud grief of devastation, but the quiet grief of someone who is releasing something they have been holding carefully for a long time. And when it was done, she felt the way she always felt after a genuine release, emptied and clear and certain. She washed her face at the kitchen sink. She dried it with the dish towel. She picked up her phone and she called Rosa. "It's over," she said, when Rosa answered. "You okay?" "Yes, the baby. Very okay. She's been kicking since I sat down. That's my niece. A beat. Do you want company tonight?" "No. I'm going to pack the last things and sleep here tonight and leave in the morning as planned. I'm fine. Call me if you're not fine. You'll be my first call." She hung up. She went to the bedroom and began the final packing. She sorted the last items left for the sake of appearances. The things she needed for tomorrow morning. The things she'd been saving until the last moment. She moved efficiently. She knew exactly what needed to be packed and where it was going and how it would fit in the car. She had planned this down to the individual item. When she was done, the bedroom looked like a bedroom. The apartment looked like an apartment. Everything was in its place, except her. And she had been out of place here for 3 months. And tomorrow, she would be in the right place. She opened her laptop. She began to write the email to Vivienne. She had been composing it in her head for weeks. She had the longer draft saved in her email, but this was not the moment for it. The full version could wait until later, when there was time for the whole truth. Tonight, she wrote, "Vivienne, I want you to know before you hear it from anyone else. I'm leaving tomorrow morning. The marriage is over not because of tonight specifically, but tonight was the last night I planned to be here. And now it has happened. I am well. The baby is well. She is due in February, and I would like you to meet her when the time is right. If you want that." She paused. She added times, "Thank you for always being honest with me. In a family where honesty was not always available, that mattered more than I ever said." She sent it. She closed the laptop. She turned off most of the lights, leaving on the corner lamp she'd always liked. She made herself a cup of herbal tea and sat at the kitchen table one last time in the apartment she had made her home for 4 years. She sat there with the fact of leaving. She was not sad about the apartment. She was grateful for it, for the kitchen window, for the corner lamp, for the specific quality of the afternoon light in October, for the 3 years before September, when this had been a place she had genuinely loved living. She was not a person who erased good things because bad things had happened afterward. The good things were real. She was carrying them with her in the way she carried everything real intact, filed in their correct category, available when needed. Tomorrow was December 26th. She was going home. She lay in the dark of Christmas night, and she listened to the apartment breathe. She had expected to fall asleep quickly, the clean sleep she'd had for 3 months, the kind that came when decisions were made and energy was held in reserve for execution. Instead, she lay awake. She lay with her hand on her stomach and listened to the particular silence of an apartment no one else now occupied. She let herself be in it for a while. She had been in many silences in her life. The silence of her childhood apartment after her father left, which was the silence of something large having moved through, and the air not quite settled yet. The silence of design school at 2 a.m, when she was the last one in the studio, which was productive and self-chosen and not lonely at all. The silence of her first apartment in Chicago, which she had been in alone for 2 years before she met Gael, and which had been the silence of someone building something and living in the process of the building. This silence was different from all of those. This was the silence of an ending. It had a flatness, a missingness in the small, ordinary household sounds that usually filled a place. She listened to it. She did not resist it. She had made a practice, in the months since September, of not resisting what was true about her situation, because resistance used energy she needed for other things. What was true tonight was that she was lying in the apartment she was leaving, in the life she was leaving, and it was Christmas night, and she had spent it mostly alone, and had cried for 20 minutes, and had felt better after crying, and had packed the last of her things, and had written an email to her mother-in-law, and had drunk a cup of herbal tea. These were the true things of this night. She held them. The baby moved. A small, decisive movement. Not the full-body kick that had been a feature of the 7th month, but the specific pressure of a small foot against the inner wall. Deliberate and separate. The movement of someone who was aware of the space they occupied and was making their presence known. Mara put her hand over the place where the pressure had been and held it there. "Hey," she said quietly to the dark. "I know. We're almost there." The baby moved again, twice, and then settled. Mara lay still with her hand on her stomach, and she thought about February and about what the first morning with her daughter would be like, and about what she wanted that morning to be. She thought about the Wicker Park apartment with its south-facing windows. She imagined the February morning light coming through them lower and more oblique than in October, but still light. She thought about the lights she had bought, the small warm ones that she was going to hang in the window the day after tomorrow, and about how they would look from the street below, and about how they would look from the inside, from the position of someone sitting in that light, doing their work or feeding their daughter, or simply being in a space that was theirs. She fell asleep at some point, still with her hand on her stomach. She slept the rest of the night without waking. In the morning she rose at 6:30. The apartment was dark. The December dawn was still an hour away. She moved through it quietly. Not because she needed to be quiet, but because the quiet felt right for this final morning. She made coffee. She stood at the kitchen window and watched the street below doing its early morning version of itself. A dog walker. A man with a newspaper under his arm. The particular stillness of a residential street before the day had fully committed to being itself. She thought about what she needed to do this morning. The car was loaded from the night before she had finished the loading at 10, after the email to Vivienne. With the systematic efficiency she had given to every step of this process, what remained was the envelope. The envelope was on the kitchen table, where she had placed it the night before, after the final packing. It was a standard manila envelope, with her name written on the outside in Gael's handwriting. She had used one of his old envelopes from the Home Office for correspondence, because the handwriting was not hers, and she wanted, for reasons she could not fully name, the outside to bear a trace of him. Inside it were the divorce petition, the custody agreement, the financial settlement document, and the handwritten note. She picked up the envelope. She held it for a moment. She had rewritten only the note inside, not to correct bad phrasing, but because the first draft simply ran too long for what she needed it to do. She had written 3 versions over the course of October and November. The first was a full explanation, A plain accounting of what happened when, what she felt, and what she decided. The second was shorter, more direct, less interested in explanation and more in information. The third was a single sentence, and it was the right version, not an explanation, not an accusation, not an appeal to his understanding or his conscience. Just a fact, the most relevant fact, the one that would tell him, in 5 words, exactly what the last 3 months had been. I have known since September. She set the envelope back on the table. She picked up her coffee. She looked at the apartment in the early morning dark, at the kitchen she had organized and the corner lamp she had left on, at the tree in the living room with its lights still on because she had not turned them off the night before and had decided she would leave them on for when he came home. She made her peace with it, not in a dramatic way, not with ceremony. She simply stood in the kitchen with her coffee and let herself look at the place she had lived. She thought, I made this place good. I made it warm and ordered and livable. I am going to do the same thing with the next place and the one after that because that is what I do. I make things good. She finished her coffee. She put the mug in the dishwasher. She picked up her jacket and her bag and both sets of keys. She left the apartment keys on the table beside the envelope. A deliberate decision, because leaving the keys was the right grammar for this particular departure. And she went to the door. She stopped. She turned back and looked at the apartment one more time. She thought about the first night she had slept in this apartment, before they were married. When Gael had moved in, and she had stayed the first night, and it had felt enormous and possible and full of the specific anticipation of a life that was beginning. She thought about the morning after, when she had stood in this kitchen different then, not yet organized the way she had organized it, and made coffee, and looked out the window at a different version of the same street, and thought, this is going to be good. She had been right. For a while. It had been good. For a while. She left the keys on the table, next to the envelope. She left. Her car was half a block away, and she walked to it in the early morning cold. Her jacket open because her coat no longer closed comfortably over her stomach, and that was all she could manage. She thought, tomorrow I will be in the new apartment. I will arrange the closet the way I want, put the kettle where I want it, and make sure everything is exactly where I decide it should be. No one will move anything without asking. This was not a small thing. This was, she thought, one of the things she had not allowed herself to name for the duration of the marriage, the specific low-level friction of living in, a space that was supposed to be shared, but that she was the primary organizer of, the space of a person who maintained things, and a person who benefited from the maintenance without being particularly aware of it. She had not named it, because naming it would have required conversations she had not been ready to have, and oats because she had not been certain enough of its significance to insist on it. She was certain of it now. She got in the car. She started it. She sat for a moment with her hands on the wheel, in the particular posture of someone who is about to drive away from something significant and is taking a moment to register the significance before the moving begins. She registered it. She said, very quietly, to herself or to her daughter, or to no one in particular, okay. She put the car in drive. She drove to Wicker Park. The apartment was exactly as she had left it when she had picked up the keys, empty and precise, with the warm south-facing light that at 7 in the morning was not yet in full force but already showing which way it would fall. She had paid the first month's rent in November and had spent approximately 30 minutes in the space over the following weeks, each time confirming what she already knew, that it was sufficient, that it was good, that it would work. And now she was here to stay. She brought things up from the car in 3 trips. That was fewer than she had calculated, because she had overestimated what remained after 3 months of gradual moving. The bedroom was the first room she organized, not fully, just enough to make it habitable, because it was where she would sleep, and sleeping required a functional space. She put the bed frame together with the efficiency of someone who had assembled it before, which she had, twice, in previous apartments. She put the mattress on it. She put the sheets on it. She looked at it. It was a bed. It would do. She arranged the crib in the corner of the bedroom that had the best light for daytime, because she had read that infants could detect light through their eyelids and that natural light was important for establishing sleep rhythms. And because she was the kind of person who read things and incorporated them into her planning, the crib went together without difficulty. She stood back from it. It looked exactly like what it was, a place where her daughter was going to sleep, in a room that was theirs. She made tea. There was no kettle, yet the kettle was in a box she had not unpacked, so she boiled water in a small saucepan on the stove and made it that way. Standing at the kitchen counter and watching the water come to a simmer in the particular way of water in a pan rather than a kettle, which was slightly slower and slightly less precise, but arrived at the same destination. She made the tea. She took it to the window. The south-facing window had a ledge wide enough to sit on. She had noted this when she first viewed the apartment and had thought about it since the specific pleasure of a window ledge wide enough to actually occupy. To sit in the light, with your legs folded and your back against the frame, and the city below doing its thing. She sat on the ledge with her tea, and she looked at the street below, which was a different street from the one she had been looking at for 4 years, doing a different version of the same early morning business. She thought, I am going to sit here a lot. I am going to do a great deal of my thinking here. In this light, with this view, I am going to know this street the way I know the other street, and it is going to be mine in the way that things are mine when you live with them long enough. At 9 in the morning, her phone showed a missed call from Gael. She had expected this. He had come home from Petra's or wherever he had been. She had stopped tracking it after the plan was complete and had found the apartment and the envelope. She looked at the missed call for a long moment. She did not call back. There was nothing to say on the phone that was not already in the envelope, and the phone call would have been for his benefit, not hers, and this morning was not for his benefit. At 9:15, a text message, Fuamara, call me. She put the phone face down on the window ledge. She drank her tea. She looked at the street. She thought about what his morning was like. She could imagine it precisely because she had been living alongside him for 3 months and had built an accurate picture of how he processed things he had not anticipated. First came a kind of blankness, the specific blankness of a person whose model of reality has stopped fitting the evidence. Then, a search for an explanation. Then, when the explanation was found, she knew, since September, a reckoning. The precise and private reckoning of a person who has been caught, not in the thing they did, but in the vastly larger thing they failed to do, which was to see the person they were living with clearly enough to understand what that person was doing. She did not feel sorry for him. She felt something more neutral and more accurate. She felt that he was experiencing the consequence of his own choices, which was appropriate, and that experiencing appropriate consequences was not the same as suffering, and was not the same as punishment, but was simply the way causality worked, in a universe that was not interested in anyone's comfort. He had made choices. The choices had led here. This was correct. At 10. A call from Vivienne. I got your email, Vivienne said. Her voice had the particular quality of someone who had been expecting a call and had prepared for it without showing the preparation. I know. I'm sorry you had to find out this way. Don't be sorry. You did the right thing. You told me directly. Abhause. Are you in the new place? Yes. Since this morning. Is it good? It's going to be good. The light is right. Good. The light matters. Another pause. And in it, Mara heard something that was not quite grief and not quite anger, but was the specific quality of a woman who has understood something about her son that she did not want to be true and has been understanding it. In increments. For longer than this morning. Mara. Yes. I don't have words for what I want to say about Guile. You don't need to. I know I don't need to. I want to. A breath. He's my son and I love him, and he has done something that I cannot defend and will not try to defend. And I am sorry that you were the one who paid for who he has not yet learned to be. The specificity of it, times not yet learned to be, times landed with the accuracy of a phrase that was being used precisely, not a judgment, not a defense, just a description. Vivienne had always had this quality, the ability to describe what was true without weaponizing the truth in either direction. Thank you, Mara said. The baby. February 14th. Of course it is. And in Vivienne's voice, there was the ghost of something that was, against all the weight of the morning, almost humor. I'll be there if you want me. I want you. Then I'll be there. Pause. Call me when you're ready to talk more. Take your time. I will. She hung up. She sat with the phone in her hand, and she thought about Vivienne, about the specific goodness of a person who could hold complexity without collapsing it, who could love her son and tell the truth about what he had done in the same breath. She had known, when she married into this family, that Vivienne was the best thing in it. She had been right about that, and the rightness of it was something she was carrying forward. She put the phone in her pocket. She went to the car. She brought up the last 2 boxes. She unpacked them in the kitchen, placing things where she had already decided. The kettle went here, the cutting board there, and the mugs went on the second shelf because she would be reaching for them constantly, and that shelf was the right height. She organized the kitchen with the efficiency of someone who had been organizing things her whole life and who had learned that the most important decision in any organization was the first one, because the first one set the logic for everything that followed. At 2 in the afternoon, she made soup from ingredients she had picked up at the corner store on the way back from the car. It was the simple soup she had made 100 times and needed no recipe. Made with onion, carrot, and lentil in the proportions she carried in her hands rather than in her head. She stood at the stove, and she stirred it, and she listened to it, and she thought about her mother teaching her to make this soup, standing in the kitchen in her mother's apartment, in the way that her mother had stood in the kitchen solidly, without wasted motion, with the particular economy of someone who had learned to cook with limited equipment and had carried that economy into adulthood as a quality rather than a constraint. She had Gail's mother's number in her phone, and she had her own mother's voice in her hands, and she thought, I am going to be all right. She ate the soup at the kitchen table, outside the window. The December afternoon was retreating in the way of December afternoons, the light giving up early and the city adjusting. After she finished eating, she got the lights from the bag and she stood at the south window and she hung them. She had not brought a ladder, she didn't own one, and she was not going to stand on a chair at 7 months pregnant, but the window ledge was low enough that she could reach the frame if she stood on her toes. Carefully, for the seconds it required, she draped the lights along the top of the window frame, pressing the small adhesive tabs that held them in place. And when she was done, she stepped back and she turned them on. The lights were small and warm, and they cast the specific quality of light that she had been thinking about since she bought them, not bright enough to change the room, just warm enough to change the feeling of the room, the way a good detail in a design changed the feeling of the whole without changing the structure. She looked at them. She looked at the window with the lights and the street below beginning its evening and the December dark coming down on the city. She thought, this is the first thing I put in this space. This light, these small, warm lights that I bought for myself because I wanted them, that is the first thing. She sat on the window ledge with the lights above her and the street below, and her daughter settling into the evening in the way she had been settling lately, with a kind of fullness, a sense of occupying her allotted space completely, and she sat in the new apartment in the new year that was coming, and she thought about nothing, and everything, and mostly she sat in the light that she had made. Her phone rang at 7. "Rosa." "How is it?" Rosa said. "Good. I hung lights. Christmas lights. Christmas is over." "I know. I hung them anyway." Rosa laughed the way she laughed at things that were both absurd and correct. "Of course you did." "Ah, pause. How are you really?" "I'm really good," Mara said. "I'm sitting in the window with the lights on, and I can see the street, and the soup was good, and the bedroom is organized, and the crib is assembled, and I talked to Vivienne, and she's going to come when the baby comes." "Ah, pause. I'm really, genuinely good, Rosa." "Okay," Rosa said. "I believe you. You should. I do. Beat. I'm proud of you, Mara, for leaving, for the whole thing, for doing it the right way, for not letting him see you fall apart when you were falling apart, for putting yourself in a position where you got to choose the ending. Pause. That took 3 months of being incredibly disciplined, and I know how much that cost you." Mara looked at the lights. She thought about what it had cost, not the money, not the logistics. It had been the sustained work of living in 2 realities at once, keeping her private self intact while the public self kept performing. "It cost a lot," she said. "It was worth it." "I know it was. Thank you for the storage space." "Stop thanking me for the storage space. It's a storage space. It was more than a storage space. You're going to make me say something sentimental, and I hate that." "No, you don't." "No, I don't. Pause. Come to Evanston this weekend. Bring yourself and the baby, and we'll make the soup and watch something." "Yes," Mara said. "That sounds exactly right." They said goodnight. She put the phone down. She sat in the window with the lights and the dark street below, and her daughter quiet inside her. She thought through the day from the grey dawn in the old apartment to the soup, the lights, Vivienne's voice, and Rosa's laugh, and she told herself, "This is a good day. This is the first day of the new version, and it is a good day." She believed it with the clear conviction of someone who had earned the right to say it, and she let herself feel it fully, without qualification or hedging against future trouble. She was in the right place. She had gotten herself here. She was going to stay. She turned off everything except the lights. She sat in their warmth for another hour. She went to bed in the new apartment, in the bedroom with the crib in the corner and the window that would have south-facing light in the morning. She slept. The deep, specific sleep of someone who had completed something enormous and was on the other side of it. Tomorrow was the 27th. The next chapter had its first full day. She had thought, before this day, that the first day of the new version would feel momentous, the way beginnings do. That it would carry the specific weight of arriving somewhere important and standing at the threshold of something she'd been moving toward. What it actually felt like was quieter than that. It felt like a Tuesday. The most honest description. She had a quiet day in which you had things to do. You did them, and the doing of them was, in itself, the beginning. She checked her phone in the morning, and there was a text from Gail that she did not open and would not open until she was ready, which would be soon, but was not yet this morning. There was an email from Vivienne, longer than the brief exchange of the day before. It listed practical things, the visit in February, and whether there was anything Vivienne could bring. A small detail Vivienne had remembered about the apartment building that might help. A lawyer she trusted, who specialized in family law in case Mara wanted a second opinion, and 3 other practical notes, none of which required an immediate response. Taken together, those items communicated a single thing clearly: I am here. I am in your corner, and I will show up in the specific, useful ways rather than in gestures that are mainly about the person doing the showing up. Mara read the email twice. She wrote back times, "Thank you. I'll call you this week." She sent it. She made tea. She set up her laptop at the kitchen table. She opened the logo project she had been working on the day before she had sent the revision on Christmas afternoon. She had received a response late that evening from the client, whom she had always liked for his directness, which said simply, "Times. This is exactly right. Thank you." She looked at the final version. It was good. It was clean and exact, and said what it was supposed to say without saying more than that. She thought, that is what I am going to keep doing. Work that is exactly right. Work that does what it is meant to do. She had a full client roster for January and February, carefully managed over the past months to account for the end of the pregnancy. She had reduced the volume of new projects in November and December, taking on only work she could complete before the end of January. She had been transparent with her existing clients about her timeline for the early part of the year. They had all been accommodating. Her client relationships were built on the same foundation as her other good relationships: reliability, honesty, clear communication, and the consistent, on-time delivery of the work she said she would provide. She was not worried about income. She had run the numbers enough times to have stopped running them. The morning moved in the way of productive mornings, not quickly, but with the quality of forward motion, of one thing leading to the next thing, in the way that organized work did when you had organized it well. She completed a smaller revision for a second client by 11. She ate lunch at the kitchen table, the remaining soup from the day before. Still good. And she looked out the window, and she thought about the afternoon. The afternoon was going to include unpacking the second bedroom's worth of boxes that were still stacked against the living room wall. She had not hurried this, because hurrying it did not serve anything. The boxes were orderly, labeled clearly, and she knew what was in each one. And unpacking them would take approximately 4 hours if she did it at the pace that allowed her to make correct decisions about where things went, rather than the pace that simply moved things from boxes to surfaces. She was going to unpack at the right pace. She was, she thought, settling. Not in the sense of settling for less than she deserved, but in the literal sense of the word becoming settled. Establishing the particular rootedness of a person who has found their correct location and is beginning the work of living in it. This was something she had always done. She had settled in the Chicago apartment in the same way. In the first apartment before that. In the studio where she worked, and the places she worked before the studio. She was good at settling. She had a talent for making spaces hers, for bringing the things that were important and arranging them in the way that made sense, and then living in the arrangement as if it had always been that way. This was both a practical skill and something more fundamental, the capacity to be at home in a place you had chosen, even if the choosing had been difficult. She unpacked until 4. The living room was beginning to look like a living room, the desk in the east corner, the second-hand sofa that had arrived that morning from the delivery company, 2 plants she had brought from the old apartment, and that were already seeming to agree with the south-facing light. She stopped when the light changed, because December afternoons changed quickly, and she wanted to be in the window when the last of the afternoon light came through. She sat on the window ledge, and she watched the street below making its transition to evening, and she thought about her daughter, who was due in 54 days. And about what 54 days looked like in terms of what she needed to do to be ready. The list was not overwhelming. She had been building toward this for months, and the building had been good, and the foundation was solid. 54 days was enough. Rosa came on the 28th, as planned. She arrived with food. She'd always come that way, because bringing a meal was her most direct offering of care, and she moved around the apartment with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in her sister's rooms. No matter which one at all, she looked at the apartment with the eye of someone who had been hearing about it for 2 months and was now seeing it for the first time. "The light really is good," she said. I told you. You did. She set the soup on the counter. Soup was the Solis family language for most things. And then she turned to look at Mara. You look different. Different how? Less like someone carrying something, and more like someone who put it down. She thought about it for a moment. You look like yourself. She thought about what herself looked like from the outside. What had been different about it in the months of September through December. I was carrying something, she said. I put it down. Yes. Rosa looked around the apartment again. This is going to be good. It is going to be good. Show me the nursery. She showed her the nursery. It was the bedroom with the crib in the corner, the window, and the arrangement she'd been planning since October. Rosa looked at the crib for a long moment. She had not seen it in person before. It had been assembled in the old apartment, moved during the months of preparation, and she'd only seen it in photographs. She stood in front of it now, with the expression of someone taking in something real. It's a good crib, she said. I chose it carefully. Of course you did. She touched the railing. She's going to be here in February. 53 days. Rosa looked at her. You're counting. I'm planning. Counting is part of planning. You're counting, Rosa said again, with the specific affection of someone who had known their sister long enough to find her most characteristic qualities genuinely endearing. 53 days. Okay. They ate soup in the kitchen. They talked about Rosa's classroom, which was always worth talking about. A dinosaur drawing had been followed by an elaborate crayon rendering of a magic rock, a distinction the student insisted on, even though the picture looked like any other rock to an outside eye. They talked about a movie Rosa had seen that Mara hadn't, and about a book they had both read that summer, and about their mother's upcoming visit to Chicago in March, which was going to coincide with the baby being 6 weeks old. They talked about all of these things in the way they had always talked, with the specific ease of two people who had grown up together and who understood each other at a level that required very little explanation. Mara thought, sitting at her kitchen table in her new apartment, with her sister and the soup and the lights in the window and her daughter quiet inside her. I have exactly what I need. Not everything I ever wanted. Not everything I had planned before September. But everything that is actually necessary, and some things that are more than necessary, that are genuinely good. She had, she thought, landed in the right place. After Rosa left, she sat at the kitchen table for a long time. She was not waiting for anything. She was simply sitting, something she had not allowed herself to do for the whole 3 months. She had spent that time occupied with tasks and managing plans. She sat and let the apartment make its sounds around her, different from the old place, in the way all new spaces are the pipe's specific frequency, the sound of the building settling, and the noise of the street below, a different street at a different distance. She was learning the sounds. She thought, in a month, I will know all of these sounds, and they will be mine. The way everything in this space is mine. She thought about Gael, not with bitterness and not with longing, but with the specific, clear-eyed attention she had been giving to the whole situation for 3 months. She thought about who he was, as accurately as she could see him. He was a man who had been given a great deal without having been required to look at what he was receiving. He had received her care and her attention and her work and her love, and the specific ongoing labor of making a home out of a shared space. And he had received all of it the way he received most things, as background condition rather than as gift, as the expected operation of his environment rather than as the choice of another person who was choosing him and who could choose otherwise. He had never learned to look. That was the whole story. That was what she had understood. On the window ledge of the old apartment, in the dark of Christmas night, when she had let herself say the true thing, I needed you to see me, and you never learned how. She did not hate him for it. She felt something more accurate than hate, which was a kind of sorrow not for herself. She had taken care of herself, but for the version of them that could have been different, if he had learned to look. For the marriage they had not had because he had never understood that a marriage, like anything worth building, required ongoing and specific attention. She had given that. He had not given it back. The end. She went to bed. She slept. The new year was 9 days away, and she had 52 days until February 14th. And the lights in the window were still on, and she was exactly where she had brought herself to be. Gail Whitmore had not expected to find the apartment empty. He had expected, in the specific mental state of someone returning to a life they'd temporarily suspended, the usual, the corner lamp on, Mara in bed or on the couch, the quiet, ordered apartment that had always been one of the reliable facts of his existence. He had expected to come home and find his life where he had left it. He found, instead, an envelope on the kitchen table. He saw it from the doorway, a manila envelope with his name on the outside, his handwriting on his own envelope, which was strange. The first strange thing he noticed. Though it would not be the last. He set down his keys. He took off his coat. He stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment, looking at the envelope, the way you looked at things that you already understood were significant, but had not yet processed the significance of. He picked it up. He opened it. He looked at what was inside. The divorce petition was first. He saw the heading before he read the document itself. The formal language spelled out exactly what it was, in the unambiguous way of legal documents. He put it down. He picked up the financial settlement document pages of it, organized and precise, with tabs marking the places where his signature would eventually be required, with the work of someone who had spent time with a lawyer ensuring that everything was covered, that nothing had been overlooked. He put it down. He picked up the custody agreement. He read the custody agreement. It was generous. He would not have said that in the moment. In the moment he was not capable of seeing it as generous, because he was not yet capable of seeing anything clearly. But the custody agreement was, by any objective measure, generous to him. She had given him more than she was required to give, more than she might have been advised to give, and she had done it with the same systematic attention that was visible in everything she did. The agreement addressed the birth, the early months, the longer-term schedule. It addressed the baby's needs first and organized everything around those needs with the precision of someone who had thought carefully about what a child required and had built the legal framework to serve that requirement rather than to serve either parent's preferences. He put the custody agreement down. He picked up the note. It was a slip, torn from the notepad by the phone, the little pad she always kept there for anything she thought worth writing down, like reminders and decisions. She had written on it in the deliberate, clear handwriting she had when she was writing for accuracy rather than speed. I have known since September. He read it twice. He put it down. He picked it up and read it again. 5 words. He counted them. 5. He thought about what September meant. And then about October, November, December. About 3 months of dinners and conversations and the nursery. About Christmas Eve and the pancakes on Christmas morning. He thought about her in the kitchen doorway when he left the smile. The 3 words, and suddenly understood, with the specific, complete clarity of someone whose recent past had been rearranged. What that smile had meant. She had known. She had known since September. She had known all along throughout the nursery conversations and the Christmas shopping, at the dinner with Brant and Lydia, on Christmas morning, through the gifts and the pancakes, while he kept believing he had successfully concealed it from her. She had known, and she had continued to make pancakes, and she had organized the divorce documents, and she had prepared for her departure with the methodical completeness of someone who did not intend to be caught unprepared. He sat down on the kitchen floor, not at the table, not in a chair on the floor. Sitting in a chair was something you did once you had organized yourself enough to choose a position, and he had not yet managed that. He sat on the floor with the note in his hand, and he thought about September. He thought about what September had looked like from where he had been standing. He thought about how confident he'd been, not arrogant. He told himself, not careless, but the sort of confidence that comes from arranging a deception carefully and never getting any sign that the arrangement has failed. He had been certain that she didn't know. He had based this certainty on his assessment of her, which had been the assessment of someone who watched from a position of comfortable proximity, close enough to think they were looking, far enough away to miss what was actually there. He had not looked. He understood this now, in the specific and painful clarity of someone who has just seen the evidence of their own blindness. He had not looked at her. He had looked at the version of her that was easiest to see, the competent, organized, self-contained version. The version that managed things and did not require management. The version that ran smoothly and therefore did not attract the particular kind of attention that things requiring maintenance attracted. He had seen the surface because the surface had been excellent, and he had not investigated what was beneath it, because investigating would have required him to acknowledge that there was something beneath it, and acknowledging that would have required him to see her fully. And seeing her fully would have required him to be present in a way that was more effortful than he had been willing to be. He had not been willing. He had chosen the easier thing. He had chosen the easier thing, consistently and repeatedly, over the entirety of their marriage. She had known, said nothing, and had done the work. He sat on the kitchen floor for a long time. He was not sure how long. The light in the apartment moved, December light, low and cold, shifting from the specific quality of morning to the specific quality of mid-morning in a way that told him at least an hour had passed. He got up. He went to the window. He looked out at the street. He thought about Petra. He thought about the phone call he had needed to make, the call he had made in the car on the way home. The conversation that had been brief and had had the quality of a conversation conducted under pressure, and he thought about how Petra had sounded on the phone, not cold, not unkind, but slightly removed, in the specific way of someone who is aware that the situation they are in has shifted and is recalibrating. He had registered this at the time without fully processing it. He processed it now. He processed it in the context of sitting alone in an apartment that had been emptied of every material evidence of the person who had made it livable. And in that context, the recalibration in Petra's voice took on a different quality than it had in the car. He called his mother. Vivienne answered on the second ring. He said, "Mom." He couldn't say more. It was unusual. He was a lawyer, used to speaking clearly under pressure. And the fact he managed only one word said as much about what the morning had done to him in that moment. "I know," Vivienne said. He waited for her to say more. "She didn't," he said. "You knew." Not about the specific situation, about the marriage. A pause, and in it he heard something he recognized as the quality his mother had when she was being precise rather than diplomatic. "I've known for a while that there was something you were choosing not to look at. Gael, I didn't know the shape of it. I knew the shape of the not looking." He stood at the window with the phone. "She emailed you last night, after you left." He thought about the timeline, Mara. On Christmas night, in the apartment she was about to leave, composing an email to his mother. He thought about what kind of person did that. And the answer he arrived at was the same answer he had been arriving at all morning, a person who was thorough, who was honest, who understood that some things were owed regardless of the inconvenience of owing them. What did she say? "She told me she was leaving. She told me the baby was well. She told me she wanted me in the child's life, if I wanted that. Pause. And she thanked me for being honest with her. Which is guile. She thanked me for being honest. Do you understand what that tells me about what you gave her? He did not answer. He looked at the street below. He thought about 3 years of Mara navigating his family, which was not a simple family, which was a family that had its preferences and its dynamics and its specific ways of operating that required navigation. And he thought about the fact that what she had valued in all of that was his mother's honesty. He thought about what that said about the rest of it. What do I do? He said. You give her the time she needs. You sign the papers. You be a father to your daughter. Which means showing up in the ways she has outlined and not making her spend her energy managing your access to your own child. Vivienne paused. And you think seriously about who you want to be. Not as a husband. That ship has sailed, and it sailed in a direction you chose. As a person, as a father, as someone who is going to have to decide, from here, how to live. I know. You say you know. I'm not sure you do yet. I think you're still in the part where you understand that something bad has happened. The understanding of why it happened and what it means about you is going to take longer. He was quiet. Outside, the street was going about its business. A dog walker, a woman with a stroller, 2 people talking at the corner. He watched them. He thought about Mara in this kitchen making Christmas morning pancakes for the last time, doing it without drama, without the specific performance of a person doing something for the last time. Just doing it because it was what she did and because she was going to keep doing it. He thought about what kind of person did that. Is she okay? He said. She seems more okay than you, Vivienne said. Not unkindly. Precisely. That seems right. Yes, it does. A pause. Gael. Yes. I love you. You're my son and I love you, and none of that changes. And I'm also going to be honest with you, you have done something that is going to take you a long time to account for. Not legally. Not financially, personally, to yourself. What you did to Mara, and what you allowed to happen to your marriage, and what you chose not to see, those things are going to be with you for a long time. The only question is what you decide to do with them. He held the phone. He thought about the note, 5 words, and about what it meant that she had known since September and had said nothing, had prepared in silence, had organized everything she needed to organize, and had left with the completeness of someone who had planned not just a departure, but the beginning of something new. He thought about what kind of 3 months those had been for her. He thought about what kind of person could manage those 3 months. She's extraordinary, he said. He said it with the specific quality of someone who had just understood something that had been in front of them the entire time. Yes, Vivienne said. She is. He hung up. He sat in the empty apartment for the rest of the morning, doing nothing very useful and thinking many things that were true and that he was not yet sure what to do with. He thought about the way he had understood Mara, which was as a person who was reliable and competent and organized as a backdrop against which his own life operated. He thought about how insufficient this understanding had been. He thought about how different it was to know someone could do things and to actually see what those abilities were for. He had known she was capable. He had not seen what the capability was in service of. It was herself, the baby, the life she was building in the Wicker Park apartment. An address he would not know unless she chose to tell him. He did not know the address of the apartment his pregnant wife had moved into. He thought about that for a while. He thought about what it meant that she had been able to arrange an entire departure. The apartment, the legal documents, the financial preparation, the conversation with his mother, all of it had been set up without him knowing. He thought about what kind of attention he would have had to be paying in order to have seen any of it. He thought about the coffee mug on the box under the bed. He had seen it several times and had never once wondered about it. He had not looked. He ordered food in the afternoon because he needed to eat, and there was nothing in the refrigerator except the leftovers from a dinner Mara had made 3 days ago, which he ate instead of waiting for the delivery. He ate, standing at the counter. He thought about how many times she had made dinner in this kitchen, and how many times he had eaten it without thinking about the fact that she had made it. He thought about how many things he had received without thinking about the receiving. He thought about Petra. He thought about this in the way he had been putting off thinking about it all day, because thinking about it required a level of honesty about his own motivations that he had not been ready for until the afternoon, when the initial shock of the morning had settled into something steadier. He thought, what had Petra been? Actually, she had been something he had wanted. She had been a person who was new to him, which made her interesting in the way that new things were interesting. She had been a distraction from the things in his life that required more from him than he had been willing to give. She had been convenient. She had been, in the way these things often are, a way of avoiding the harder work, of looking at the life he had and understanding what it required of him, and of facing his own part in it. He had looked toward Petra because looking toward Petra was easier than looking at Mara, because Petra had been new enough not to have seen his limitations yet, because with Petra he could be the version of himself that required no accountability to anything that had already happened. That was the honest version, and it was not a version he was proud of. He thought about the note, "I have known since September." He thought about what October had been, and November, and December, and Christmas morning, from her side. He thought about sitting across from someone at the breakfast table who knew what you were doing and who was not going to tell you that she knew. Not yet. Not until she was ready. Not until she had done everything she needed to do to be okay on her own. He thought about what that required. He thought about making pancakes on a last Christmas morning in an apartment, knowing it was the last, and still making them well, because that was what you did. He thought about the smile. The smile had not been disordered. He understood that now. He had read it. In the moment. As he wasn't sure what he had read it as. Resignation. Perhaps. Or the specific disconnection of someone who had stopped caring enough to react. He understood now that it was neither of those things. It had been the smile of someone who knew where they were going and had organized themselves to get there, and who was, in the specific moment of her husband leaving for his girlfriend on Christmas evening, simply done. She was done. She had been ready to be done for a long time. And the done had arrived, and she was letting it arrive. She had smiled because she was leaving. She had smiled because she had chosen herself. She had smiled because she was already, in the most essential sense, gone. He had not known. He had not known any of it, and the knowing of it now. Alone in the apartment, at the end of a day that had reorganized everything he understood about the last 3 months, was not the knowing he would have chosen, but was the knowing he had arrived at, and it was accurate, and he was going to have to do something with it. He wrote an email to Mara at 10 that evening. He wrote several drafts. He threw them all away. He wrote the last one, which was 1 sentence, and he sent it before he could revise it into something longer and less honest. I have been reading the note all day, and I understand now what I should have understood much earlier, and I'm sorry. He sent it. He put the phone down. He looked at the empty apartment for a long time. He thought about what his mother had said. The only question is what you decide to do with them, and he thought, I don't know yet. I genuinely don't know yet. I think the knowing is going to take time I haven't had yet. He thought, that is the most honest thing I have said about this in a long time. Possibly, ever. And it is a beginning. He turned off the lights in the apartment. He went to bed. He lay in the dark and thought about February, his daughter's due date. He thought about what it would require of him to be the father he needed to be. He thought about it not as an obligation, but as the actual question it was. What was required? What did he need to become? What did he need to look at? that he had been not looking at for so long, that he had forgotten he was not looking. He lay in the dark, and he held the question. It was not a comfortable question to hold. He held it anyway. This was, he thought, perhaps the first thing he had held without putting it down when it became uncomfortable. He was going to try to keep holding it. The apartment was quiet around him. He listened to it, the particular quiet of an apartment where the organizing presence was gone. The things that had made it feel lived in were now somewhere else, and the space had reverted to its neutral self. He thought she made this place livable. She made all the places she was in livable. She did it with attention and care, and the ongoing labor of someone who understood that a space required maintenance to be good. He thought I was supposed to be doing that too. He thought I was not doing it. He thought, I am going to have to learn how. He fell asleep at some point, holding the question. In the morning he signed the papers. The signing of the papers was not the dramatic event he had imagined it would be. He had imagined he could see. Now, that most of his imaginings were inadequate to the actual texture of things, he had imagined it as a moment freighted with significance, as the thing you did when you were ready to do it, as the arrival at a place, rather than the continuation of a process. What it was, in practice. There was a Tuesday morning appointment with his own attorney, a different attorney from the one who had prepared the documents on Mara's behalf. The same attorney could not represent both parties, and he needed that explained because he had not been thinking clearly enough on the 26th to understand it without explanation. And it was a review of the documents, the signing of his name in 4 places, the handshake at the end, and the drive home. He had done it on the 27th, the day after Christmas. He had done it because the papers were in front of him. The right thing to do when a thing needed to be done was to do it without unnecessary delay. He had learned this in his professional life. There, delay served the interests of people who needed time to construct a position, which was not what he needed. And doing the right thing quickly was respected in a way slow. Doing the right thing was not. He applied the same logic here. The papers needed to be signed. He signed them. His attorney said the terms were fair, even favorable to him in places, and that the drafting on Mara's side looked like the work of a competent family law practitioner, and that if he had any concerns about specific provisions, they could discuss them. He told his attorney to proceed as drafted. His attorney gave him the look of someone who expected their client to have more fight and was recalibrating. He drove home. He did not tell Petra about the papers until the 2nd day of January. That was the day he finally had the conversation he had been constructing in his head since Christmas morning. He had been constructing it because the conversation needed to be done well, not for strategic reasons, but because Petra was a person and deserved a conversation rather than a text message or an email or the passive silence of someone who had decided something and was implementing it without consultation. They met for coffee in a place that was not the restaurant he had taken her to, not any of the places that had been theirs. It was a neutral coffee shop on a street that belonged to neither of them. He had expected the conversation to be difficult in the way of conversations where you were telling someone something they did not want to hear. It was not that kind of difficult. It was difficult in a different way, in the way of a conversation that confirmed something both parties had been aware of without naming. Petra listened to him without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "I know," she said, not accusatory. "Honest. I know you know," he said. "I wanted to say it anyway." She looked at him across the coffee. She looked at him with the specific quality of someone who is assessing something they have been thinking about for a while. "You're different," she said. "Since Christmas." "Yes." "Did she say something to you?" "She left me a note." He paused. 5 words. "Enough." Petra was quiet again. She held her cup. She looked at the window, at the January street outside. "I hope she's okay," she said, and he heard, in it, that she meant it genuinely, without complexity, in the way that people occasionally said something without agenda and meant it simply. "She's better than okay," he said. "I think she's probably better than she's been in a long time." Petra looked at him. "And you?" "I'm working on it." He thought about his mother's voice on the phone. "The only question is what you decide to do with them. I'm in the working on it phase." "That's honest. I'm trying to be honest. It's taking some practice." She almost smiled at that. He thought, the almost, which was both the ending of something and the acknowledgement of something that had been real, which seemed like the right note. They finished their coffee. They said goodbye in the street outside. Briefly, without ceremony. He walked to his car. He sat in it for a moment. He thought, that is the last thing I needed to do that was about the past. He thought everything from here is about the future. He put the car in drive. The weeks between Christmas and February were the weeks in which Gail Whitmore began the work of understanding what he had done and what it meant and what it required of him. He did this work the way he did all work, with the specific, systematic attention of someone who understood that getting through a thing required addressing it directly rather than organizing around it. He found a therapist, not because his mother told him to, though she mentioned it, but because he understood that the thing he was trying to understand required more than he was equipped to do on his own, and that admitting this was part of the understanding. He went to therapy twice a week in January, and every session was difficult, and every session was useful, and at the end of January, he was further along in the understanding than he had been at the beginning, which was the metric that mattered. He thought about Mara in the evenings. Often, he thought about her not with longing. He was honest enough with himself. Now, to know the difference between longing and the specific nostalgia of a person who had valued something insufficiently while they had it, but with the particular quality of thought that was directed towards someone you were now obligated to relate to correctly and were learning how. He thought about what co-parenting required, about what it meant to be a father to a child whose mother you had harmed, about the specific work of being a parent who showed up for the child without using the child as a vehicle for managing your relationship with the other parent. He had read about this. He had talked about it in therapy. He was building his understanding of what it was going to require. He called Mara on the 15th of January. He had prepared for the call in the way he now prepared for things he needed to do well. He thought about what he wanted to say. He identified the purpose of the call. And he made the call. She said on the third ring. "Gail," she said. Not warmly, not coldly, accurately. "I wanted to call about the February arrangements." He said, "I have some questions about what would be useful. What would help?" She was quiet for a moment. He heard the quality of the quiet, the specific kind that she had, which was the quiet of someone who was thinking rather than someone who was waiting. "That's the right question," she said. "What would help is what I want to talk about." They talked for 20 minutes. He asked practical questions. He did not try to make the call into something other than what it was. It was two people organizing the logistics of a significant shared event. And she did not either, which he took as something to be grateful for. At the end of the call, she said, "I'll send you the contact information for the midwife." He said he would appreciate that. She sent it that evening. He had read her email, the one from Christmas night, the one that had been in his inbox when he had finally opened his phone on Christmas morning in an apartment that was no longer hers many times in January. It was brief. It had told him she was leaving and that the baby was well and that she wanted Vivian to have the information before she heard it from him. It had been warm in the way of something written by someone who had decided that warmth was appropriate regardless of the circumstances. Not performed warmth, but genuine warmth. Someone who understood that clarity did not require coldness, that leaving did not require cruelty, and that the truth could be told with care and still be told completely. He had read it many times because it was the clearest communication he had received about who Mara was, And understanding who Mara was had become. In January, one of the things he was trying to do, he was doing it too late. He knew this. He was not going to get the marriage back. He would not have the family unit he had been in the process of destroying. The unit he had failed to value. He was not going to have the early mornings of a child's first months in a home that was also the child's mother's home. He was not going to have the partnership that he had failed to be a partner in. He had had those things and he had chosen otherwise, and the choosing had had consequences, and the consequences were what they were. He was trying to understand what to do within them. His mother visited in the 3rd week of January. For 2 days. They talked more directly than they had talked in years, which was the particular quality of a crisis that had reorganized what was possible between people who were in the habit of operating at the comfortable level. Vivienne said things to him that were true and that he needed to hear. He heard them. He did not argue. This was progress. On the last evening of her visit, after dinner, Vivienne looked at him across the kitchen table and said, "She's done a remarkable thing. You're Mara. Not just the leaving. The whole of it, the preparation, the silence. The way she managed to protect herself and the baby, and still leave you the documents you needed, and still tell me directly, and still she's done everything she needed to do. And she's done it without making it about you. That's harder than it sounds. I know," he said. "I'm understanding that." "Good." She looked at her hands. "She's going to be a good mother. She's going to be an extraordinary mother." "Yes." Pause. "And you have a chance to be a good father. Not an extraordinary one. Not yet. But a good one. If you do the work. I'm doing the work. I know you are. Keep doing it." She looked up at him. "For the baby. For yourself. And Gael, for what it was worth. For the good years. Because there were good years. And they were worth something. Even if they ended the way they ended." He thought about the good years. He thought about the early ones. The ones before September. The ones that had been what they had appeared to be. He thought about Mara in those years, the specific quality of her. The attention she brought to things. The way she could look at something and see what it was and communicate what she saw without drama or inflation. Just clearly and well. He had loved that quality. He had loved it, and had not thought about what it was in service of, which was everything, which was the marriage, which was him. He had received it, and had not returned it, and the receiving without returning had accumulated into the thing that had ended on Christmas Day. "I'll keep doing the work," he said. "I promise." She reached across the table and put her hand on his. "Good," she said. "That's all I need." January in the Wicker Park apartment was the month Mara Solis learned what she was made of. She had thought, going in, that she already knew this. She had learned it in different ways, at different points in her life. Design school, the first years of freelancing. Even the pregnancy itself had taught her things about her body and a capacity for sustained effort she had not known before. But January was different. January was the month in which she was living entirely in the life she had built, with no transition and no buffer and no performance of anything other than herself. And the self she was living as had to be sufficient on its own terms, without the supporting structure of a marriage. However hollow that marriage had become, it was sufficient. She was not surprised by this, but she was gratified by it in the way that you were gratified when a calculation you had run many times turned out to be correct in the real world. The calculation had been, "I can do this." The real world confirmed it. She did it. She worked. January was, by the terms of her planning, a lighter work month. She had managed her client calendar to reduce the volume of projects in the last weeks of the pregnancy, but lighter did not mean absent. And the work she had was the kind of work she did best focused, specific, requiring both technical skill and the quality of clear seeing that was her most reliable professional attribute. She completed a brand refresh for a restaurant group she had been working with for 3 years. The kind of project that required her to understand what the client was trying to communicate and translate it into visual language that said it clearly and without waste. She did this well. She had always done it well, and she continued to do it well, regardless of the circumstances around it. Because the work was hers, and it did not depend on who she was living with or what she was going through. She set up the apartment properly in the first week of January, which meant doing the things she had not had the energy or the focus to do on the 26th and 27th. She hung things on the walls, 3 prints she had bought over the past few years and that she had kept in storage during the marriage because they had not fit the aesthetic of the old apartment, which had been organized around Gail's preferences and her willingness to accommodate them. The prints looked right here. They looked like they had been waiting for this space, which in some sense they had. She put the books on the shelves the way she wanted them, not alphabetically or by subject. She arranged them by how they talked to each other by color and size and the private logic of objects, meanings she understood and was finally free to show. She organized the kitchen with the completeness of someone who understood that a kitchen organized correctly was the difference between cooking being a pleasure and cooking being a task. She had always found cooking a pleasure. She intended to keep finding it so. She organized the nursery in the second week of January. It was a more sustained project than the bedroom it required, not just arranging things but the building of systems. The specific kind of systematic thinking needed for a small person who would have many needs that had to be met efficiently during those first months. She had read extensively about it. In the precise way she read what mattered. With pen in hand and the focused attention of someone gathering knowledge to use rather than for its own sake. She organized the nursery according to the notes, which were organized according to the understanding of someone who had thought carefully about what a new baby required, and in what order, and in what proximity to one another. When she was done, the nursery was exactly right. She stood in the doorway of the nursery on the 15th of January and looked at it. She thought she is going to come home to this. Approximately 30 days from now, the due date was the 14th of February, and first babies occasionally ran late and occasionally arrived early. And she had planned for both eventualities. Her daughter was going to be in this room, in the crib, in the corner, in the space that Mara had organized for her. She thought about this with the specific, clear-eyed anticipation of someone who had been waiting for something real. She could see the waiting coming toward its end. She was not anxious. She was ready. Vivienne called every few days. Not to check in the way of someone who was monitoring a situation. Vivienne was not a monitor. Had never been a monitor. She trusted the people she cared about to manage their own situations and was available without being intrusive. She called to talk, which was different. She called to tell Mara about things that were happening in her own life, about a trip she was planning in the spring, about a book she was reading, and about the dynamics of the Whitmore family at the New Year gathering she had attended without Mara for the first time. She described it with the dry, affectionate humor she brought to the things in her life that were simultaneously frustrating and absurd. Mara found these calls restorative in a way she had not expected. Vivienne was honest, not performing, simply there and talking. A person Mara respected in the ordinary way of a relationship that did not require anything beyond showing up. She thought about Vivienne's words from the Christmas phone call times. "I'm sorry that you were the one who paid for, who he has not yet learned to be." Not yet learned. She had turned the phrase over many times in January, holding the not yet in the way she held things that had more weight in them than was visible on the surface. Not yet implied later. Not yet implied something that was still possible. She was not interested in whether Gail was going to learn to be the person he needed to be. That was his work, not hers. And she had always been very clear about the distinction between her work and other people's work. She was interested in the not yet because it was honest. because it said what was true about the situation, that the failure was not constitutional, not fundamental, not about something that could not be otherwise, but about a choice that had been made consistently, accumulated, that had become a pattern and then become a fact. Not yet is different from never. She held this without conclusion. It was not her work to act on it. It was information. And she filed information. She filed everything in January. She was a person who processed by filing, who made sense of her experience by categorizing it correctly and then putting it where it belonged. And January gave her a great deal to file, the sadness about the marriage, which continued to be a real thing she experienced, and which she continued to give its proper space, not to live in, but to acknowledge, because unacknowledged grief had a way of becoming heavier than acknowledged grief. The genuine pleasure of the new apartment, which was increasing in direct proportion to the time she spent in it, the practical satisfaction of competent work, the specific warmth of her relationship with Rosa, which had acquired a new quality in January, not because anything fundamental had changed, but because the external structures had changed, because the buffer of the marriage had been removed, and what remained was the direct relationship, which was more immediate and more clearly itself than it had been when it was one of several concurrent relationships competing for Mara's attention. She and Rosa talked more in January than they had in any previous January. She was grateful for this. She thought, in the evenings sometimes, about Giles' email. The one he had sent on Christmas night times. I have been reading the note all day, and I understand now what I should have understood much earlier, and I'm sorry. She had read it on the morning of the 26th, sitting in the new apartment with her tea, and she had sat with it for a long time before deciding what to do with it. The decision she arrived at was this: she was going to hold it in the appropriate category, which was the category of things that were true and that she did not need to act on yet. And she was going to respond to it when she was ready to respond, which was not yet. She was ready on the 8th of January. She sat at the kitchen table with her laptop, and she wrote one sentence. It took her approximately 15 minutes, because she had learned, in 3 months, of very precise communication, that a sentence meant to do a specific thing required the time it required, and she sent it. I know, and I don't want to spend the year ahead in the weight of it. So let's do the work of being good parents together, and let that be what this is. She sent it. She put the laptop away. She made dinner. He had replied within an hour times, yes, that's exactly right. Thank you. And then times, the February plan, can we talk through the details times? And she had replied, call me on the 15th. And he had. And the conversation had been what it needed to be, practical and clear and organized around the baby rather than around either of them, which was the right way for the conversation to be organized. And she had come away from it with the specific satisfaction of someone who had done a thing correctly. The midwife appointment on January 20th was the last one before the due date. Her name was Celia, and she had been Mara's midwife since the beginning of the pregnancy. A woman in her late 40s with the particular quality of someone who had spent decades being present at beginnings and who had therefore developed a very accurate understanding of what those beginnings required and did not require. Celia looked at Mara at the 20th week appointment with the eye of someone who could read the difference between a person who was well and a person who was performing wellness. And she said, "You're well." "I am," Mara said. "The stress markers are down from last month. The circumstances have changed." Celia looked at her. She was not the kind of person who asked questions you had not indicated wanting to answer. She nodded. "The baby is in position. Head down. She's ready to go when she's ready. She has opinions," Mara said. "She's been having them for 2 months. That tracks." Celia looked at her chart. February 14th. Is the due date? Yes. They're not always prompt. I know. I've planned for the range. Of course you have. Celia looked up from the chart. You have someone with you for the birth. My sister. And the baby's grandmother, the one I want there. Good. She looked at Mara for a moment. You're going to be fine. I know, Mara said. I believe that. She left the appointment feeling something she had not felt since September. It was not the calm of controlled circumstances, but the real warmth of being okay. The sense of having done what she needed to do and standing at the threshold of something new. She was going to be a mother. She was going to be a mother in 35 days. Approximately. And she was ready. And the readiness was real. She called Rosa from the car. The appointment was good. She said, she's in position. Head down. Ready to go. She's ready, Rosa said, with the specific delight of someone who had been waiting for news about a person they were already invested in. She's very ready. She's been practicing her opinions on my ribcage. Rosa laughed. She's a Solis. She is absolutely a Solis. Mara drove through the January streets, which were doing what January streets did, grey and purposeful, with the particular efficiency of a city that had made its peace with winter. Rosa. Yeah, thank you. For the storage space. For the moving help. For all the October and November conversations. For all of it. Stop thanking me. I'm going to keep thanking you. I know. You're going to thank me for the next 40 years. A pause. And in it, the specific warmth of someone who was okay with this. You're welcome. Mara. For everything. For all of it. She drove home. She made soup. She ate it at the kitchen table and looked toward the south-facing window where the lights were. She thought about the next 35 days with the focused, organized attention of someone who had been planning for months and was now in the final approach. And she thought, I am ready. I have been ready for a long time. I just needed to get to the point where ready was the only thing left to be. She had a text from Gael that evening, sent at 8:30 contact information for a pediatrician he had spoken with. The pediatrician was recommended by a colleague and had a practice convenient to both the old apartment and the Wicker Park apartment. She looked at the text for a moment. She thought, he is trying. She thought, good. She texted back the name of her own pediatrician, who was already established and who Celia had recommended in October. She texted, Times I have one. But thank you, he said. Times. Of course. Is there anything else useful I can do? Times. She thought about this. She texted Times. Just be ready for February. He texted back Times. I am. She put the phone down. She thought about the exchange, practical, brief, organized around the child, and she thought, this is what it is going to be. This functional, clear-eyed co-parenting that was organized around the daughter and not around either of them. This was the structure. She could work within this structure. She had built structures before, and she had lived in them, and the structure was the thing that made the living possible. And this structure was sound. She thought about Gael for a moment, not with bitterness and not with longing, but with the clear-eyed assessment she used on things she wanted to understand. He was a person who had the chance to become better than he had been, and whether he took that chance was his business. What she hoped for him was the same thing she hoped for most people facing a big change in themselves, that they would take the chance, do the work, and that the work would produce something real. She had no stake in the outcome. She had organized her life so that she did not have to have a stake in the outcome. The outcome was his. She had a stake in the daughter, who would someday know her father and have an opinion about him. And for the sake of that opinion, for the sake of her daughter's experience of her father being as good as it could be, she hoped he would do the work. That was the extent of her investment in Gail Whitmore's future. It was a specific and appropriate extent. She went to bed at 10. She lay in the dark of the bedroom with the window letting in the particular ambient light of a January city night, and she thought about February. She thought about what it would be like to hold her daughter for the first time, the specific weight of it, the specific reality of a person who had been hypothetical becoming actual. She had been imagining this moment for months, with the careful precision she brought to all imaginings that mattered. She had a picture of it, not sentimental or staged, but a true, honest, specific image of herself, in a room with her daughter for the first time. Looking at this new person who would be hers to raise, she thought, I have no idea. Actually, I have no idea what it is going to be like. I have organized everything I can organize, and I have planned everything I can plan, and the moment itself is going to be what it is. And whatever it is, it will be the beginning. She fell asleep. Outside. The city was doing what it did at 10 o'clock on a January night, moving through its quiet evening with the specific efficiency of a city that had been doing this for a long time and knew how. Vivienne came on the first day of February. It was 2 weeks before the due date, the time Mara had asked her to arrive. She arrived on a Thursday morning with a large bag. It held several things that were immediately useful and several that were the kind of gift you give when you understand someone's preferences, which Vivienne did. She came in and looked at the apartment with the eye of someone seeing it for the first time. She had been hearing about it for weeks and had formed expectations from what she had heard. The light really is good, she said. I know. And you've made it yours. Vivienne looked at the prints on the wall, at the arrangement of the bookshelves, at the kitchen through the doorway. This looks like you. It is me, Mara said. Everything in it is mine. Vivienne looked at her. Something moved in her expression, not sentiment. She was not a sentimental woman, but something more precise. The specific quality of someone who understood the significance of what had just been said. Good, she said. They had tea. Vivienne had brought the good tea, a specific brand from a specific shop, which she had learned was Mara's preference over 2 years of Thursday afternoon visits that they had established early in the marriage and maintained through it. She had brought the tea because she remembered. This was Vivienne, someone who remembered things that mattered to you and acted on the remembering without calling attention to the action. They talked for 2 hours. They talked about the room Vivienne would be staying in. Mara had bought a small folding bed for the living room and organized the space to accommodate a guest without disrupting the arrangements Mara had built. They also talked about the midwife, the hospital, and the birth plan, which Mara had organized into a clear document that was not long but covered the necessary details. They talked about what the first weeks would look like, and about how Vivienne could be most useful. Vivienne did not volunteer anything. She asked what was needed and listened to the answers. And when Mara told her what would help, she agreed and did not add unnecessary commentary. Gaël, Vivienne said, after a pause in the conversation about the practical arrangements. He's been going to therapy. I know, Mara said. He told you. He mentioned it when we talked on the 15th. I was glad. Vivienne looked at her. You were glad. I was glad that he's doing work. For his own sake. And for hers. Mara looked at her tea. I don't have any interest in what happens to him in the way of, I'm not invested in his future the way I was. But for her sake. For the father she's going to have. Yes, I was glad. Vivienne was cute for a moment. You're extraordinary, she said. Not as flattery. Not as performance. As an observation. I'm practical, Mara said. Those aren't mutually exclusive. Mara thought about this. She thought about the last 4 months, September, October, November, December, January, and now February. She thought about what they had required of her, what she had given, and what she had gotten her life, the one she was living in, right now, in this apartment, with this light, waiting for her daughter. She had gotten her life back, or forward, or into the shape it needed to be. She had done that. The practicality. and the extraordinary, and the 3 months of silent, careful preparation had all been in service of this, sitting in the kitchen of an apartment that was hers, drinking good tea with a woman she respected. 35 days past the night, she had smiled at the kitchen door and said, "Enjoy your night," and meant it completely. "I'm both," she said. "I'll accept both." Vivienne smiled. The quick, specific smile that was hers, not warm in the broad, demonstrative sense, but warm in the precise sense. The warmth of someone who was pleased by something and was not going to make a production of being pleased. "Good," she said. Rosa arrived on the 6th. The apartment, which had been organized for 1 and then reorganized for 2, adjusted again for 3, not without effort, because small apartments and multiple people required genuine management of space, but without the specific difficulty of incompatible people in a shared space, because Rosa and Vivienne were, it turned out, entirely compatible, which was either coincidence or the logical result of both of them being people who were honest without performing honesty and who understood that genuine care did not require constant expression. They liked each other on the first day, which was the most efficient thing that could have happened. They spent the 3 days before the birth in the apartment the way people do when something will arrive on its own schedule. They chose to be present in the waiting, not anxious in it. They cooked dinner together on the 7th. The first time Mara had cooked for other people in the new apartment. The meal was good, a slow Sunday dinner that produced warmth and, made in this kitchen for these 2 people, felt like the truest use of a Sunday evening. They ate at the kitchen table with the south-facing window and the lights and the January dark outside, and they talked about things that were not waiting, about Rosa's class, about Vivienne's travel plans, about a design project Mara was thinking about for the spring, and the conversation was easy in the specific way of people who are comfortable with each other and who understand that the comfort is its own gift and does not need to be decorated. On February 14th, at 6:18 in the morning, Mara's daughter was born. She was born in the hospital 3 blocks from the Wicker Park apartment, which Mara had chosen for its proximity and its midwifery-aligned approach and its specific record on the things that mattered to her. She was born at 6:18, after a labor that had started at midnight. By the terms of labors, it was neither extremely long nor extremely short, but exactly what it was, what it needed to be, requiring what it required, and arriving at what it arrived at. Rosa was there from the beginning. Vivienne came at 3, when Mara called her, and was there for the last hours. Gael was informed at 7, after the birth, by a text that Mara had composed in advance times. She arrived this morning. 6:18. "We are both well. I'll be in touch this week about a visit," he said 20 minutes later. "Times, thank you for telling me. I'm so glad you're both well." He did not ask to come. Mara felt a specific appreciation for people who understood what was appropriate to the moment and acted accordingly. She held her daughter for the first time at 6:24, 6 minutes after the birth. 6 minutes. She had not been counting, but that she would later know were 6 minutes. She held her, and she looked at her. The daughter looked back in the unfocused, searching way of newborns, taking in more than they could process. Mara looked at her with the full attention she gave to everything that mattered. She thought, "So this is you." She thought that she had been thinking about this child since September, since the day she decided to do all of this differently, since that Tuesday morning in a taxi when she finally understood what was happening in her life and that the baby was coming. She thought, "You have been the reason for everything. Not in the sense that I did this for you, I did this for me, because I needed to do it for me first, but in the sense that you have been the fixed point, the thing I was organizing toward, and now you are here. And here is exactly right. She did not say any of this out loud. She held her daughter, and she looked at her, and she thought it. And the daughter did her newborn things, the specific, ancient work of new arrival. The adjustment to the enormous change of being outside rather than inside, the first assessments of a world that was large beyond comprehension and close beyond comprehension simultaneously. "Hello?" Mara said quietly to her daughter. "I've been waiting to meet you." She had been waiting for months. For this specific person. In this specific form. The waiting was over. The beginning was here. Rosa cried, which was entirely appropriate, and which Mara expected. Vivienne did not cry, which was also entirely appropriate, and which Mara expected. But the quality of Vivienne's face when she looked at the baby was something Mara filed in the category of things she was going to keep a kind of resolution. A specific peace. The face of someone who has seen a good thing come to be after a period of uncertainty, and who is relieved and glad. She looked at Vivienne, and Vivienne looked back, and something passed between them that did not require language, which was the specific communication of people who understood each other. She named her daughter in the afternoon. She had had the name for 2 months, had known it in October, had been sitting with it. He had been confirming it in the way she confirmed things she was certain of, which was by returning to them repeatedly until the certainty was stable. The name was Elara. She had chosen it because she liked the sound of it and because it meant something she could not easily translate, but that felt accurate, luminous, bright, specific. She thought Elara Solis. She thought that is a name that belongs to itself. It does not carry anyone else's weight. It is exactly what it is. She told Rosa the name first. Rosa said it out loud, twice, and then said, "Yes, that's right." She told Vivienne. Vivienne was quiet for a moment, and then said, "That's a good name." She would tell Gael when she told him the other things, the visit, the arrangements, the beginning of the specific structure they had agreed to. She would tell him then. She was in the hospital for 1 night. That was what she had planned for, and it was sufficient. She went home the next morning, home to the Wicker Park apartment, which was her home, with the south-facing windows and the good light, and Vivienne and Rosa were with her, and Elara was in her carrier in the back seat. The February morning was gray in the specific way of February mornings in Chicago that did not offer anything but were consistent, and Mara drove through it, thinking about the apartment, and about the lights in the window, and about what the first morning at home was going to be like. It was, like most true things, exactly what it was, and nothing more or less. She brought Elara in, and she set the carrier down in the living room, and she took Elara out of it and held her, and looked at the apartment around them, the prints on the wall, the bookshelves, the kitchen through the doorway, the south-facing windows, and she thought, "This is ours. This space is ours, and I made it ours, and we are going to be here. And it is good." She had done it. The 3 months, and the preparation, and the lawyer, and the storage unit, and the departure on the morning of the 26th, and the soup, and the lights, and the 35 days in the new apartment, and the conversations with Vivienne, and the calls with Rosa, and the practical exchange, with Gael, and the midwife appointment and the birth. All of it was hers to handle. She had done it, one piece at a time, with the systematic attention she brought to everything that required systematic attention. She had gotten herself to this morning, which was the morning she had been working toward since September, which was the morning she had her daughter, and her apartment, and her work, and her people, and it was enough. It was more than enough. The smile on Christmas night had been for this. Not performed, not calculated real. The specific realness of someone who knows where they are going and is letting the door close behind them. She had smiled because she was leaving a thing she had outgrown, because she had organized her departure with completeness and care. because her daughter was coming, and her life was ahead of her, and the man in the charcoal coat was walking out the door, and she was standing in the kitchen with her hand on the door frame, and she was ready. She was absolutely ready, and the readiness was its own kind of joy. She had smiled because she had chosen herself. She had been choosing herself for 3 months, and this was the moment the choosing became visible, and she had let it be visible. Briefly, warmly, without drama. Enjoy your night. She still meant it. 2 months later, in the February morning, with Alara in her arms, let him have his night. She had her morning. She had all her mornings. Every one of them from here, in the life she had built, and the light she had hung, and the daughter she was holding, and the name she had chosen, and the apartment that was hers, and the work that was hers, and the people who were hers, and the months ahead, and the years ahead, and everything that was going to come. She had chosen herself. She was still choosing herself, every morning, deliberately, and with full knowledge of the cost and the rightness of it. She stood in the south-facing light of her apartment on the morning of the 15th of February, with her daughter in her arms, and she thought, this is the beginning. This is what I made. This is mine. It was enough. It was everything. It was exactly right. She put Alara down for the first time at 10 in the morning in the crib that had traveled from the old apartment to this one, that she had assembled twice, that had been waiting in the corner of the bedroom for this moment, and she stood over the crib. She watched her daughter sleep, which was the specific, unhurried watching of someone who is in the presence of something that requires only presence, that does not require action or management or planning, that simply requires you to be there. She was there. She was entirely there. Rosa made tea in the kitchen. Vivienne was on the phone in the living room, speaking quietly. The apartment made its sounds, the specific sounds she had been learning since December 26th, which she knew now the hiss of the radiator in the southeast corner, the particular creak of the floorboard near the bathroom doorway, the sound the window made when the wind came from the north. She knew these sounds, and they were hers. She left the bedroom without closing the door. She had a monitor, which she had set up the night before, and she went to the kitchen. Rosa handed her tea without being asked, which was the specific competence of someone who understood what another person needed before the person had organized the need into a request. She took the tea. She stood at the kitchen window. The February morning was what? February mornings were grey and honest, and making no promises, and she looked at it, and I thought about nothing and everything, and mostly she stood in the kitchen with her tea and let the morning be what it was. Vivienne came to the kitchen when the phone call was done. She looked at Mara. She looked at the tea. She said, "She's asleep. She's asleep." Then, "Sit down." Vivienne said it the way she usually did, directly, without ceremony. More a statement of what was appropriate than a suggestion. Mara sat down. She wrapped both hands around the tea. She sat at the kitchen table of the apartment that was hers in the specific way she had been building toward since September. And she sat with the specific fullness of a person who has arrived somewhere they meant to arrive. And she thought, this is right. This is exactly right. Rosa sat down across from her. Vivienne sat at the corner. The three of them sat around the kitchen table in the February morning, and they did not talk about anything significant, which was the most significant thing they could have done. Rosa talked about the most recent dinosaur drawing, which had evolved into an entire series that the student was now calling Dino Facts, and which contained approximately 50% actual dinosaur facts and 50% impressionistic speculation about what dinosaurs might have preferred for breakfast. Vivienne asked about the specifics of the Cretaceous diet, which she had apparently been reading about, and Rosa said that according to her student, T-Rexes preferred waffles, and Vivienne considered this for a moment and said, the arms would make it difficult, and Rosa laughed, and Mara laughed, and in the bedroom, The monitor was quiet, and the morning was continuing, and the kitchen was warm and full of people she loved. She thought about the smile again. Briefly. The way she reviewed things she had filed correctly, not to reopen them but to confirm they were where they belonged. The smile on Christmas night. 3 words. The door. The sound of his car. The 20 minutes of grief, and the call to Rosa, and the packing, and the email to Vivienne, and the drive to Wicker Park in the December morning, and the lights in the window, and the soup, and the January, and the midwife appointment, and the labor, and the birth. And this morning, she thought about all of it in sequence. The whole chain of it, from the September taxi to the February kitchen, and she thought, yes, that is the story. That is what happened. That is what I made happen. She was the kind of person who made things happen. She had made things happen her whole life. In design school, in freelance work, in the careful building of a professional reputation, in the way she moved through the world. She had organized herself around the truth of her situation, and she had acted on it, and she had built the thing that needed to be built, and she was living in it. This was not extraordinary in the sense of being beyond what a person could do. It was extraordinary because it had been done extremely well, with care and with precision. It had the full investment of someone who knew the work mattered and who would not accept insufficient work on anything that mattered. She set down the tea. She stood. She went to the window and watched the street, busy in the spare, efficient way of a February morning that paid no mind to atmospherics. She thought about the spring, 2 months away. She pictured the plants she planned for the window boxes that she had not yet bought, and the walks she'd take with Alara in the carrier through the neighborhood she was still learning. She thought about the work waiting for her in March. The brand refresh she had agreed to would be her first substantial project after the baby. She thought about the email she would send to Guile this week. It contained the specifics of the first visit, already organized in her head and only needing to be written down. She thought about all of this. The thought felt full and sufficient, and nothing in it was more than she could hold or less than she deserved. She turned from the window. Rosa and Vivienne were still at the table, still talking. Vivienne had apparently moved from Cretaceous dietary habits to whether dinosaurs could appreciate beauty, a question Rosa engaged with fully, and which Mara thought was exactly the kind of question Vivienne would ask in this moment, because Vivienne always went straight to the interesting rather than the accessible. She looked at them for a moment. She thought, these are my people. In the kitchen of my apartment, on the morning after the birth of my daughter. These are my people, and they are here. She sat down. She picked up her tea. She joined the conversation. The month ahead would be what it would be, imprecise and demanding, in the way that new motherhood was imprecise and demanding, requiring things she had planned for and things she had not anticipated, moving at a pace she had read about and that she would discover was different in the actual experience. She was ready for this. She was ready for the not knowing as much as for the planning, because she had learned in the last 4 months that readiness was not the same as having all the information. Readiness was the willingness to meet the thing that arrived with full attention and the capacity to act on what you found. And she had both of those. She had always had both of those. She had known since September, and from September she had built her way to this morning, piece by piece, with the care and precision that good building required. And the building was sound, and the light was right, and her daughter was in the bedroom, and her people were at the table, and the tea was still warm, and the city was outside the window, and she was in the exact place she had made for herself, which was the place she was supposed to be. The moral of this story was not about the smile, though the smile was the truest image of it. The moral was not about the leaving, or about the preparation, or about the lawyer, or the storage unit, or the 3 months of quiet strategic action. The moral was simpler and harder, and more available than any of that. She had looked at her life, and she had seen it as it was, and she had known that what she saw was not what she deserved, and not what she wanted, and she had decided, without drama and without performance, to do something about it. She had done something about it. She had done it systematically and with care, and she had not stopped doing it until it was done. That was the whole story. Courage was not the absence of fear. Courage was the decision to act on what you knew when you knew it, to see clearly and to build accordingly, to choose yourself with the same care and attention you had been giving to someone who was not choosing you back. It was the morning after, in the apartment you had made, with your daughter asleep in the room you had organized, and your people at the table, and the February light coming through the window you had chosen. Courage was this kitchen, this morning, this life. She had known since September, and from September she had known what to do, and she had done it. She was here,